OTB's The Hurling Pod with James Skehill and Paul Murphy.
Tá craobhna here in an Ashen Gailliam. People of Galway, we love you.
I don't want to leave the people of Waterford down, you know, because they're my life, you know. People of Waterford are my life, you know, and I love me county, you know.
We love John Malone.
It's almost like they're afraid to kind of go and hurl and just let themselves express themselves. It's like as if they're nearly afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you have to make a mistake and just throw off that bit of nervousness and have a go.
Yeah, it's pure constipated hurling.
Welcome along to episode 5 of season 2 of the Hurling Pod with Paul Murphy and James Skehill. Lads, how are you getting on?
How you going, lads?
Great, how are things?
I'm going to be honest, Skehill, I have a little bit of envy of football at the moment because I was covering the football games at the weekend, and my first thought was, well, hurling is off on this break at the moment. We're waiting for 2 weeks now where teams are on the verge of already qualifying for semi-finals, and we have a fair idea of how the relegation is going to go in the top flight of Division 1 of the Hurling League. The football is up in the air and loads of teams can qualify for finals, and relegation is up in the air, and there's real stakes about everything at the moment because it's going to determine the second division. I'm going to be deadly honest and say I am a little bit jealous of what football is serving up at the moment.
Yeah, no, with respect, this is probably the highlight of the football year as well. You know, that's the league for them. Because we're talking obviously a while ago about you know, the hierarchy of some teams. Obviously, there's probably 8 or 9 teams that are vying for their Ireland in football every year, and that didn't mean that the vast majority of teams, with respect, probably treat the league as probably their most important, you know, competition, you could say, because their chances of winning Ireland are slimmer, to be honest. In the hurling, it's kind of a different story. I suppose we're crying for more games, we're crying for more inclusion, we're crying for more exposure, and then they put on another break, you know. And it's a tricky one with the leagues, because I know we're going to touch on this every week until the league is over. We're going to keep at it and harping about it. What do you do to kind of fix hurling? You know, do you bring in relegation? Do you keep going to the current structure? But something's going to change, and it has to change to bring in more competitive type games in hurling, because I think people are starved of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, Paul. I mean, we chatted about this at the start of the league, and it's kind of played out this way, where every team is probably now looking at this going, do you know what, just a few weeks away from Championship, the third weekend of April is there in the calendar, ready to go. Everyone wants to be at kind of peak condition for those important games in the Provincial Championship, which is a round robin and is a little bit of a slog. So it's understandable that they're probably letting off the pace a little bit at this time of the year anyway. Yeah,
and we can see it already with a few teams who, you know, in my mind, are probably going to take the foot off the gas a small bit. You know, particularly the likes of Wexford with the heavy injury list. But you can see teams at this stage, you know, they've blooded a few players. They do have Championship coming up. You know, the league hasn't really lifted off yet, but even a few teams at this stage will be kind of looking to go, okay, maybe we're going to pull it back now because we've picked up a few injuries, or, you know, there's lots of reasons there as to why teams might do that. But it doesn't look like this league might spark yet. And we did forecast well before it that the fact of the league finals being so close to the Championship would be an issue. And even before we get to that, we're kind of looking at potentially it mightn't take off at all, because the general setup at the moment means that teams can't really go hammer and tongs at it. Or maybe the situation isn't that it creates an environment where teams just will go hammer and tongs each week, and we see the best teams on the pitch each week.
Yeah, I wonder as well, Skehill, how much are teams looking at last year and going, Cork and Waterford both looked really good, say, coming out of the semi-finals particularly, because Cork had beaten Kilkenny and Waterford looked great against Wexford, and Waterford again looked excellent against Cork in the final. That there's that kind of warning that you don't want to be in that position last year where both those teams looked off it once the Championship got underway.
And they did. I think as well, what teams do is they'll always look at number one, who won their Ireland last year, that's Limerick. And what do they do? Like, you're not trying to copy them, but you're trying to match them kind of the way they're probably preparing to a certain degree. And they treated the league like it was probably a whole host of challenge games with respect to, again, you know, obviously they had their team holiday, they came back late, probably didn't do as much training as other counties, and didn't matter a damn because they went on and won the Ireland in kind of emphatic fashion. So I think that's one way of looking at it. The other way, then, if you're Cork and Waterford, you're rolling into the league, you feel really good, confidence. I don't know, a little bit of, I hate to use the word complacency set in, but they just went south. They just went south after what was a really, really impressive showing. And I always think back like how we were fooled nearly to a certain degree when after Waterford won the league, we were touting them. I think we all were. I think collectively the three of us were saying they're second, aren't Limerick, and a very close second. Then coming up to the game in the Gaelic grounds, the Championship game, Waterford put up a really good test against Limerick, and we're saying, geez, they're on course here, and they just fell asunder. So I don't know how teams. Every team is different. I think. Like if I'm looking at my own county, I'm saying that Henry's looking for more players. He's looking for more quality, seeing what he has in front of him, because he's trying to, I suppose, educate himself on who he has and treat the league that way. I think Limerick are just trying to get through it. Again, blood a few players, which they've been doing nicely, and keep a bit of momentum until they get their bigger players back, like Jim Burns, etc., and kind of integrate them into a full run. So yeah, I just think public opinion at the moment is like that. There's a general consensus out there that the league it's not really. It's obviously it's a national tournament and it's a nationally recognised tournament, but it hasn't got the same importance it has of years previous. I think that's solely down to Limerick just cakewalking everyone in the championship the last couple of years, to be honest.
Murph, what Limerick have done this time round, warm weather training camp, which I think was the plan in 2020, and then COVID kicked in and messed up the calendar. But John Kiley was going to use a warm weather training camp that year as kind of his jumping off point for getting ready for championship. This time round, the conditions have worked for them to be able to do so. In the years that you played under Brian Cody, did Kilkenny ever go out abroad on a warm weather training camp?
No, maybe a sunny day in Carton House or Photo Island was what we managed. But no, like I don't think anyone was complaining. I think these warm weather camps, trying to think of who in my time was the first county that did it. It was a tip, yeah. Like they certainly weren't common. Anyway, they're common now. Kind of, you hear a lot of teams doing it now, particularly I suppose more so in football. But no, they weren't common, and we were happy to go up to Carton House and go to Photo Island because you got the same work done. But certainly, I wouldn't have turned away, a week in Tenerife or wherever these lads go. But no, it was never even put to us by Brian if you want to go on a warm weather training camp.
Skehill, did you ever get to go abroad?
Stop, will you? It's a warm weather training camp.
Sure, anywhere outside the Galway is warm for you. Anyway, so
we were up to our knees in debt after the situation. So no, we didn't. I'll tell you, all we did was we got to go away to the warmest place we went to was Australia. We went to Sydney to play the Wild Geese Trophy in 2018 versus the Kilkenny. So that wasn't quite a training camp though. Although our management team at the time would have liked for us to do a bit more training and stay indoors more or outdoors. But yeah, that one got away from us as well. But
I'll tell you what my abiding memory of your trip over for the Wild Geese was. I was actually at a wedding in Sydney that week when the Wild Geese was on, right? So I was waiting for a haircut the day before my mate's wedding, and I was having a quick flick through the Sydney Morning Herald's sport to see what they were actually covering, right? And there was a paragraph about the Wild Geese inside the Sydney Morning Herald, because I think there was a photo shoot in front of the Opera House, which may well have taken place, I think, the day before. And he actually were there before the Australian rugby team in terms of importance within the paper. Like, people probably have this idea that, like Australia are always very competitive in rugby, that rugby union must be massive in sports coverage in Australia. It's really not. Like, Melbourne's soccer team was getting more coverage than the Australia rugby team, who were up in the Northern Hemisphere playing matches at the time. So you can say, Skehill, that your team in the Wild Geese tournament actually got more coverage than the Australian rugby team, who were up in the Northern Hemisphere at the time.
I have to admit then, I don't quite think we gave it their same respect in terms of our preparation. I'm not going to lie to you. Like Micheál, as we've come to know him for a long time now, that he's quite competitive by nature, and he would have said to us on arrival in Sydney, like, because it's Brian Cody and Kilkenny, we want to beat these lads, because we're going to meet them again, etc. We want to beat them. And let's just say we didn't listen to his words early, and we went into a public house and stayed an awful lot longer than we should have, right? So anyways, the match comes along, we're all hairy, every one of us, and half time Kilkenny are baiting the shite out of us. And it's a funny story, Adrian Toohey's young son was in the dressing room, and Micheál is going off on us, like, calling us this and that, and you're fucking this and fucking this. And actually, it was like, everyone was like, oh shit, like, he's actually cracked, and we're all kind of like, the principal's students kind of just afraid of him. And next thing he stops, and you could hear a pin drop, and Adrian Toohey's young lad just goes, Micheál, fuck is a bad word. And the whole place started laughing. And we won after, I think it was a free, it wasn't a penalty shootout, it was a freeze. Oh, yeah. So yeah, it was a great trip though. It was a great trip.
I do love that Micheál was keeping standards up as well. So you've been to 2 All-Ireland finals in those years leading into that tour, and would have been an All-Ireland final not long before you would have set out to Sydney as well. So obviously he did not believe in taking it easy or being hairy. I'm guessing Micheál was not out in the public house with you and
No, he called a meeting in the morning. I'll tell you straight out, he called a meeting in the morning after. It was, I think off memory, it could have been, a meeting was at 10 o'clock or 10:30 in the morning, and when we walked into the meeting room, we're missing a lot of lads. So and next thing, 2 lads, one lad, actually a really good friend of mine, walked in, same clothes as last night. He was coming back from the casino. So I was like, when he walked in, the management just looked at him like, what are we doing? Like, flying all the way to Sydney, and in comes this lad after, how many hours out. But Yeah, he just. Well, look, at the end of the day, the result, we won the very thing, as the lad says, right? I'm just actually waiting for it to get called back again now. When are we going back, Murph?
Jeez, I don't know.
How did you miss the trip, Murph? You weren't there.
Yeah, I was on a course in the army at the time, and I just couldn't get off. I was on this course for a year, so just that. Oh, what was it, like 10 days, 2 weeks? I think it was about 10 days, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so I just couldn't get in. I missed a few of those trips, so one or two of them. Yeah.
Jeez, it's a long way away.
Yeah.
Before the plane even hit the ground in Sydney, I said I'm never coming back here again. Because I'm too big. I'm too big for the planes, like, you know what I mean. And there was a crying child beside me the whole fucking way from, I don't know, where was it, Abu Dhabi, or we flew out of. I said I'll never come back to Australia again.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it wouldn't be the same flight as you, because you must have been there a couple of days before we arrived. But the flight in Dublin, for some reason, something to do with the runway, we ended up missing our connector in Abu Dhabi, and we had to go on a double packed plane from Abu Dhabi to Sydney on the other end. So it was like everyone literally on top of each other for whatever, the 12 or 13 hours. So I'm a bit like you. Like, I got there, I slept for about a day after I arrived because of the jet lag as well. But I was like, I'm going to have to seriously consider maybe forking out for some business class or becoming a politician and getting a business class trip if I ever go back to Sydney again. But there you go.
Around Paddy's Day, yeah.
That's the key. A wonderful trip, and you can put the feet out if you're a politician. Murph, were those training camps, albeit if they were in Photo Island or in Carton, were they actually beneficial? Because I was reading Kylie talking about this, and he was saying like how important it was going to be for Limerick. He was pointing out that maybe the most important thing was they could do a session in the morning, allow the guys to go for a sleep or do some stats work or whatever in the afternoon, keep an eye on their recovery, and then do a session in the evening. He was just saying these were things that just aren't possible when lads have got a 9 to 5 and you're trying to work around that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And he described it really well there. It was really just a time that you could dedicate to having a bit of concentrated time together, do some really good work. And I know, some people outside the group or outside, let's say, inter-county teams mightn't really see the huge value of that analysis and video analysis and sitting down as a team. They mightn't see the real beneficial value that brings. But, lots of teams will go, let's say, of a Friday morning to Carton House or Photo Island, wherever they're going to go. And they might do a session that morning with an aim to doing a really good session on the Saturday, for example, like basically playing a game and setting up whatever structures you want to set up in an environment where nobody's going to be looking at you. So on the Friday, you might go do a bit of a session, a lot of skill work, maybe a bit of running. And then lads can, go to do physios, lads can go to a pool, lads can do whatever. And it's time to relax, and it's also time to get the body right. You might do a bit of analysis then in the afternoon and a barbecue that evening, something. It's nice for lads to, like that, step out of the office, step out of the workplace, wherever it is, the farm you're on or whatever it is, and just focus on hurling with the view to the following morning. Then, you're going to get up, have the breakfast, and then go down and just go as hard as you possibly can. And usually enough, okay, with the Limerick lads going away this week, I mean, we don't have championship in sight yet, but let's say at the start of our term or my term at Kilkenny, you had breaks between games where those days you go away would be 2 weeks out from a match. So it was nearly kind of a thing as well. There was a switch inside your brain that anytime you're going on these, it was championship was starting 2 weeks later, or All-Ireland semi-final or All-Ireland final. So it was always a thing that was kind of resetting the brain, going, okay, the year might be kind of fixtures here and there and matches all over the place. But when you knew you were in Carton House or Photo Island, you were like, okay, the brain needs to switch on here now because we're so close to championship, or we're so close to a really important match that you have to make this time really count. So, look, it's great. You get really good work done, and lads shouldn't, I suppose the neutral person or even a supporter shouldn't maybe be cynical about these things. I know lads are going away for a sunny week, but the importance is that you take the player out of the environment so that they have nothing else to focus on, only the job at hand. And that, if you really support your team, is a really important thing for teams to get done. And some of the best work we did was away on those camps.
Skell, I know you said you didn't go abroad, but I'm assuming Galway had camps along the way. Are you in a similar boat that these were beneficial to get together for a few days?
Well, we would have had plenty of camps in kind of the same venues. There's only a certain amount of venues in the country you can go to. So Photo Island would have been a go-to one, Carton House, Johnson House and the like. And I just always found it was kind of, especially for people who are working, professionally, students is a different story, but it's just the time together. It's the time together, even just to have a chat, ask, because every time you're going training, you're coming from somewhere. Every time you're leaving training, you have to go somewhere. So we don't get quite that amount of time to converse, to bond is the word I suppose you can use. And every time you go training, it's always intense, it's professional, it's like business-like, it's in, out. Where on the camps, at least then you've got a bit of time together. Then you mix in a couple of little activities, and it's amazing the camaraderie that gets built out of that. and the competitiveness of players as well. So, like everything that Murph said, I fully agree with it. I agree with it all. Even something as small as having a quiz or having, there was, I think one year we did a game of charades. It was hilarious, like so that kind of stuff. And it just gets the room laughing. It gets the room together. I won't quite say it creates memories, but it creates a really good atmosphere, a good kind of ambience for the whole group, and it sets you up. And Murph is right. The couple of days we arrive, probably Friday, Saturday, and then on the Sunday, there's a 15-a-side match coming. So Friday and Saturday is grand. You're prepping, you're training hard, you're having the crack, but you do know the match is coming Sunday, and usually that match or in-house match there'll be hair and skin flying because every lad's pumped, because obviously he's had the best preparation possible. He's had time to relax. You'd hope there's no stress in his mind, and it's just 30-35 lads going at it. So I'm a big fan of them. The warm weather ones, like I just like to take, I suppose, as much uncontrollables out of the situation as possible. So I'm not sure warm weather, going away, flights, all that kind of jazz. I'm not sure about that. That's why Fort Highland was fabulous. Just go down the road, you've got a super facility, and away you go. And as Murph alluded to earlier, anywhere but Galway, the weather's better.
Yeah.
So Cork is usually good. Galway's always.
And to be fair as well, like, you go to likes of Cork and you could have a gale force wind blowing down the pitch in Fort Wild, and it could be raining, and that could be the case you're getting in an All-Ireland semi-final as well. So in not say very rarely, but if you go to all weather or a warm weather camp, it's going to be warm weather and grand. Most lads will hurl really well in warm weather, but it was the days where you went out and the pitch was a bit greasy down in Fort Wild or Carton House or Johnson or wherever you were, and like that's as practical as anything else, because you could be getting that on the day, and trying to deal with that was as much a challenge as dealing with it in 30 degrees heat. But I think most players will, if it's a sunny day, that's what players want. So a greasy ball on a wet day, and if you got that in a training camp, that was again another positive, because you could be dealing with that in the day.
The other way of looking at it, Murph, is to do what Cork did, because I was looking at the reports in the Irish Examiner on Sunday, where they had league games in Cork over the last couple of weekends, and their frontline players were released back to play for their club in the hurling league. Like, I could kind of understand maybe where there's the logic around that, back when April was at least in theory a club month and there was meant to be a few games and maybe early championship in some. But in a way, is there much benefit to send lads back to the club for 1 week and then back into an inter-county setup again?
Look, I suppose if the club setup is a case of the Cork looked at it and said, this is a good window to get a game out of the way. Otherwise, we have a very compact club fixture timeline at the other end of the year. I do see that as being a positive, that they alleviate the pressure from that end of the year. I wouldn't be very familiar now, to be honest, with their fixture list. So that may be the way they're looking at it. Like, the club aren't going to benefit enormously from, okay, they'll obviously benefit from having Conor Lehan or whoever back with them, but they're not going to get a huge amount of work done in that time that they'll carry forward towards their actual club campaign. But again, the other side of it could be said is that, using this week now for a training camp, it's nice to get away, but if Cork went away, is it a bit too far away from championship for them to have any real benefit? They could possibly have used it as, we've done really well so far. What have we done well? What have can we improve on? Absolutely. But I just see it at this stage, with the way the inter-county calendar is set up at the moment, I wouldn't begrudge a county if they decided to go club or if they decided to go on a training camp. And I don't think they're missing out if they don't go on a training camp, because, like I was saying, I mean, it's so far away at the moment. It's not as if they're completely dialed in on championship just yet. So maybe, like I was saying at the start, maybe it just alleviated the bit of a problem of a fixture list that Cork may have towards the club end of the year.
Well, Skehill, I know you love stats. So this was around the Liam Sheedy interview, which was in some of the newspapers last week ahead of his appearance on Limerick and Gale on Thursday. And they were asking Liam Sheedy about the idea of potentially changing from 3 points to 4 points being awarded for a goal. And they looked at the goals that we've seen so far, and particularly they looked at the last week of the league that we were talking about last week. So aside from Clare's goal rush against Wexford, where there was 7 goals in that game, you had 5 other games played in Division 1, just the 6 goals, so an average of 1.2 per game. And they look back at the last few years in championships. So in 2019, Limerick have gone 40 points since then, but Cork became the first team in championship to score 40 points when they played against Westmeath in the preliminary quarter-final. Goals becoming less and less frequent. So in 2021, it went back up to 3.5. It was 2.4 in 2020. And then 2022, it went back to 2.9 per game last year. Liam Sheedy said he's open to the idea of changing it, because it's been over 100 years since it went from 2 points to 3, but he was saying maybe a bit more thought has to be there before going to 4 points. Is there an argument for adding an extra incentive for goals, particularly with a lot of the top teams who are happy enough to puck it over from any distance rather than playing it inside now?
Yeah, I struggle to see why there's an argument. Like, if we had very, very low scores and we're trying to entice goals, maybe, but we've got an abundance of scores. And granted, there'll always be something wrong. Do you know what I mean? In Irish sport, someone's always going to have an issue. So if you're scoring too much, there's an issue because the ball is too light, the players are too strong, etc. Changing to 4 points in a goal. Part of me, look, I'm all for change at times. I am by no means a traditionalist, but in this instance, I kind of like the goal to stay at 3 points. You know what I mean? I'd like to see, is there any other workaround that we can probably entice players to stay in full forward line somehow? I'm not, you know, like what sport is that now where they keep the full forward, they keep players in certain halves, certain quarters? Is there? Help me out here, lads. Isn't there a sport where they keep players? Is it AFL where they keep you within a zone near the goals? You can't pass it.
I think you might be right. I think you can't withdraw players into your own half, and similarly in basketball, you have to have a player in the other half of the court, don't you?
Yeah, I'll have to research that one. But like, maybe if you had more bodies towards the goals, see what you have now is the game is so expansive and there's so much space being created inside. Let's say that goals aren't exactly very apparent, and obviously we have the shot statistics to prove it. But I'd be more towards aiming it at personnel as opposed to aiming it at the score, if you know what I mean. So if you can keep personnel in an area, I don't know how that is, I'm just throwing it out there, keep them inside the full forward line, keep them inside their 30-yard line or whatever, 3 full back line, 3 half back line, 3 full back line, 3 full forward line, you then, I think you'd get more goals, you know. But I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with Liam Sheedy in this one.
All right. Murph, what do you think? I mean, as a defender, you're probably going to say keep it at 3, but go on.
Yeah, like I suppose we actually had this conversation a few years ago with like Skehill, did you play the Super 11s in America?
Yeah.
They won. So they had to have it. That Super 11s was basically try to play a game of hurling on an American football pitch, because that's all you're going to be able to brand it to Americans as. You're not going to get a hurling size pitch. So, you know, it was obviously scaled back and there was different rules. But one of the things I was kind of suggesting then is that if you want to encourage that going for goals, was that if they score a goal, the resultant puck out, for example, has to go long. Let's say, you know, that it's in the opposition's team benefit that if you score a goal, well, most likely you're going to win the ball back from the resultant puck out. So if it's a thing of encouraging a bit more free flowing play, if you know you're going to get a goal, what does that do? What does that affect your team? You know the ball is going to come long. You maybe sit back now. A high ball is going to come down. It's going to have to be contested. So maybe it allows for a bit more open play. Like, you could get a hammering and hurling very easy by 1 or 2 or 3 goals going in, and suddenly you're on the back foot. If that turns into 4, now I think it's a good idea from Sheedy. It's creative. It's, you know, it's also an open mind that we can change the parameters around hurling. But I think if you put it up to 4, you know, the likes of Limerick, okay, they might be going for goals now, but they could absolutely trounce teams. If, you know, if they score 3 goals, that's the equivalent of scoring 4 goals in the current climate at the moment, you know. So I think pushing that out a small bit more could be more detrimental than we actually think. You know, I'd be similar enough to people arguing about making the ball heavier. I don't think they get the end result that they actually want, you know, because let's say people were saying with the ball getting heavier, for example, if you make it heavier, they somehow insinuated that was going to result in players striking the ball, it not making the goal. So then you're going to have people competing 50-50. Well, no, like the name of the game at the moment is possession. So even making the ball heavier, players are going to hold on for possession. And if Antrim hold on to it even longer, because then they have to carry it further up the pitch. So what I'd be thinking in these situations is that, like the likes of making a line ball 2 points, I think that's a simpler kind of solution to encourage scoring.
That was in before, Murph, remember?
That was around 2009 or that, was it?
That was in the league, because I remember Ger Farrell was the first man to do it.
He was cutting points over from everywhere. Sure.
My question to you was why do you think that was actually taken away, or not even introduced in the championship? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
because sidelines aren't, like, they're not everyday plays. You might get a couple in the game. Don't get me wrong. So you're not going to clip teams by changing the goals. So you're from 3 to 4.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't agree with that either. I just like I was saying, I just think it'd be. Like, because hurling, like if you talk to a lad in football and they say, you know, geez, we're hammered today, they're bet by 6 or 7 points in football. You know, hammering and hurling is 12 or 14 points, which can very easily happen to any team on a given day. I think if you make the goals that bit bigger, right, might encourage that's going for goals, but like the likes of Limerick or these could absolutely trounce teams. Like,
do you remember, Murph, in the Super 11s, am I correct in saying there was a rule for a goal was worth more if it was done on a volley or out, not being caught? Do you remember that?
Yeah, there was one where like if you scored a goal from outside the box, because they had a box on the pitch, it was like 3 points. But if you scored it inside a certain zone, it was only 2 points. Different things. So we're trying to encourage lads to take longer shots at goal. But the goals were bigger as well.
For soccer goals, they were torture. Jeez, you'd be diving on the place.
You were enormous.
Huge.
But sure, we actually had a great one with that because obviously right. So the rules were laid out, but there were obviously brand new rules for an American football pitch. And 2013, we played that game. It was Leinster versus Munster. I think were you playing it as well? Leinster versus Munster. Yeah, remember that actually. I don't know if you were on the goal that day, but in the All-Ireland final, Clare versus Cork, we played in between the minor final, I think.
We did.
And the actual,
we did.
Martin Fogarty was over us. And Martin Fogarty is cute out. If he copped something in the rule book, he'd tell nobody, and then he'd just go implement it just before the game starts. So the rule was that you couldn't score unless you were inside the opposition box. That was it. So you can't score outside the opposition box. So they wanted this free flow and play and moving around and all this stuff. And right before I went out, it was myself, Jackie, and JJ were the full back line. And Martin came over to us and he pulled us in. He said, boys, the rule is you can't score inside the opposition's box, or you can't score outside it. And we said, yeah, sure. Why would you bother going up the pitch at all? When they have possession, I want the three standing on the edge of that box and just start mowing lads out of it when they come in. So something that happened then was that we just stood right back. And as the forwards from Munster were coming through, we were just cleaning lads because they couldn't score outside the box. And Martin Fogarty was delighted because he was going, Don Logue was pulling his hair out on the other sideline because it wasn't the free-flowing game that they wanted.
I remember that.
And this was the gap. There was a gap in the rule that they thought would implement a savage free-flowing game, but actually, when used incorrectly, it actually made a mockery of the game. Not made a mockery of it, but it was not what the intended plan was.
And I found the best rule of all using the 11s was the shot clock.
That was very good, yeah.
That was fabulous. Because you knew something, because it's like just like a basketball, you know a shot's coming. So no matter where they were, there's a shot coming.
There's a shot coming. And it created a small bit of tension because lads were panicking a small bit. They're looking up, shot clock, 7 seconds left. Do I shoot? Do I pass it? What do I do? So there was actually this element of tension with it because lads were all over the place trying to juggle this shot clock and do I shoot? Don't I shoot? How much time do I have?
And what was the punishment for the shot clock? Was it a free or was it the ball thrown in?
Turnover.
So you just leave the ball down, a lad rises up, and there was no rule about being back away. So you could just rise it and flick it 5 yards to a fella, and on you.
And you can go. So the thing is, as soon as the ball dropped, you could pick and just go with it.
Yeah.
So again, the punishment was heavy, like you were getting that shot off. I remember Matty Kinney when we were over in Chicago. Then we were playing in the Notre Dame area in the championship game, is what I call it. And there was we were up a couple of points, and Matty Kinney was over us as well with Martin Fogarty, and he goes, right, I want you to drain the clock, And I said, how the fuck am I going to drain the clock? What am I going to do? So I just remember catching the ball in the last book out and driving it as high as I could. Yeah. Up 100 yards up in the cloud. Burned about 2 seconds. maybe 3 seconds it burned. And he's looking at me with his head in his hands like, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? So,
Well, you're both liking the Super 11s idea, but Skehill, I would love to see if that happened in All-Ireland final, that someone is working the ball in a late possession and next thing the shot clock goes and then the ball is flicked up and the team get a goal at the other end.
It'd be class.
It's just class, but you wait and see the fans trying to adopt that.
I know. I suppose it creates another layer of excitement, though, doesn't it? Our game is fabulous, in fairness, And I think if there were just one or two adaptations where you can just tinker things a small bit, I think you can actually make it a better spectacle. I'm not talking about doing these massive rule changes and changing things terribly. Just a few tweaks, and I don't know how we even got on the topic, but the shot clock was a great one for us. I thought the goals being bigger. No, that was not good. Soccer goals are huge.
Look, food for thought on that one. To be fair, Murph, Skehill was right last week when he said that Kyle Hayes was going to get a 1-game ban. It was speculated a bit on Thursday that it potentially would be 2 because of the danger of the stroke in the face and all that. But he's going to be banned for Limerick's game against Westmeath. It's not going to affect Limerick too adversely for this coming weekend. Was 1 game enough, Murph?
I think it was. I think it's fair enough, to be honest. I mean, he struck him in the head. He used the hurl, what do they call it, in a careless manner. But at the same time, he didn't decapitate anyone either, So, and I think it was probably a smart move from the GA as well, just to actually, to put in. Because But I did see a lot of on social media was people going, "Oh, typical Limerick and stuff," which wouldn't be a thing I feel. Okay, we can obviously say that they've gotten away with one or two things, which I think the Limerick boys have actually said themselves. You know, like Aaron Gillan, I'm fairly sure I saw an interview with him where he was saying that he probably should have got sent off against Cathal Barrett the Munster final. No, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure he said that in an interview. But you know, I saw a bit of sentiment kind of saying that, you know, it's typical of Limerick to get away with it. It's not up to Limerick. Like if the umpire or if the linesman or the ref didn't send them off, that's not Limerick's fault, you know. But I do think it was good for the GA just to, you know, ban him for one match. It puts it to bed. It's done now, and a decision was made, and we just move on from it. But I do think one game is more than enough, I think.
But a separate point, isn't it evident now that the romance around Limerick is gone?
Oh yeah, well I think it's gone a good while. Yeah.
I find now, I'd say with every successful team, if they're very successful, they become disliked.
What they do, yeah.
Like I just think of, you know, I was saying Man United, the Patriots, Kilkenny. I remember playing in a quarter final, Murph, and George Nan said something about Kilkenny slaps and this kind of stuff.
Slapping on the hand and stuff. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
we didn't have a clue about that as lessons, but you know, you see these little nuggets of information when we start being put into the media about a certain team. So I think that's it was very evident on Twitter. Let's say it was after the Limerick Galway game that the wheel was turning towards Limerick being dirty. You know, they're always at this crack, and you know, this is a trait of their play, and just the romance with them is gone now. Now there's just light. Yeah.
I'd say there's a time period of probably 2 years that you get 2 good years out of it, and after that, people want, you know, you're the underdog for a year, maybe 2, or let's say you win it. Let's say what year was it? 2018 they won.
18 won the first.
They were still kind of seen as this fresh underdog in 2019. Maybe not an underdog, but they were still a crowd favourite in 2019, and maybe stepping out of the tag of being the underdog. But you know, after maybe 21, maybe they were kind of let that little break there, 2019, where they didn't win it. You know, after that, you can start to see the sentiment turning on them. But if you look at any team, like let's say that Kilkenny team back 2006, 2009, like I wasn't on that team. And look at it from the outside. People, I mean, the big one at the time was Kilkenny don't play football. Sure, this is the only reason that they're good at hurling. Like, that's the only way. And I remember the opposing argument was, sure, Nick Faldo doesn't play tennis. This was the back and forth that was going on at the time. And then after that, then, let's say if you look at it, Dublin kind of became a dominant team then in the mid-2011 onwards. And people started, you know, it was the money was the big tag with Dublin. The only reason they're successful is there's a huge amount of money and so on. Now, let's say Dublin are after drifting from the top spot. You don't hear these arguments. Like, there's nobody still bashing about Kilkenny, you know, not being prominent in football, or let's say fielding a team. No one, people give up that ghost and they turn their view to another team. So at the moment it's Limerick, and people, like, I hate seeing it when people go on about JP and stuff. Like, he's done incredible things for Limerick, and you know, Limerick are a fabulous team, and they've set the bar higher again. But people will invariably, like you said, Skehill, you know, whether it's Man United or whether it's the Patriots, you know, this tag of if you win too much, you'll find people will come out of the woodwork and they'll just find something to beat you over the head with, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get into the games for this weekend, NASA, who sometimes comments on our YouTube, we were wondering if this was Skehill himself looking for a TV when we saw the comment come up under the YouTube last week, which was, let's get a GoFundMe page available so James can get a TV for hurling only, #FreeJames. And then I saw a similar comment from her on Twitter afterwards, which confirmed that either Skehill has gone an extra level and set up a Twitter account, which also corresponds to a YouTube account, which I'm not ruling out entirely. But let's take Nessa on her word that she's actually just feels for Skehill having to watch Love Island. The first thing that jumped into my mind, and I should have asked about this at the very start, how is Love Island this week, Skehill?
I actually managed to dodge Love Island 7 nights in a row. So I think this is...
Is your marriage hanging by a thread as a result?
Oh no, she's delighted. She gets the peace and quiet. She doesn't have me in her ear giving out about this lad and that lad and giving out about why she's watching reality television.
So you just didn't watch it, was that it?
Or she watched, she got television. Yeah. I didn't get it. I was
what
down the shed. I was down the shed with the cows. I was down
you were cutting one of these new smart balls in half or something, right? Like just straight.
Yeah, I was. Oh God, I was. In fairness, I let her off because she told me the final is in like a couple of weeks. So, and she's obviously she's also heavily pregnant. So don't get in her way. You know what I mean? Don't go near her because a switch could be flicked at any moment.
Now, will you drift back in for the final of it? Like, are you going to go, well, I'm fairly familiar with these characters, I'll sit down and watch the week of the final?
Yeah, but like a couple of people said to me last week, I hear you're a fan of Love Island. I made no such statement. I am not a fan of this show, like, so no. So the answer to your question, William, I will not check in for the final. Like, it's so predictable. The same thing over. Look, I'm actually going to go off on a rant about Love Island now, so just stop me there, okay? Stop me there, please.
They're all making connections, lifelong connections, James. They're going to stay together.
They're all trying to get their sponsorship deals when they go out, and that's all they want. That's all they want to get out, is get in there and get a sponsorship deal and then be mentioned for the rest of their life. And hey, come here, I can't blame them.
No, you can't. Look at Tommy Fury fighting away. He got
is it Molly
for
May?
no reason.
Molly May Hague, is it?
Yeah, Skehill now. You're not covering yourself in glory here.
No.
Pretending you don't know Anthem. Molly May, as quick as that, yeah. I don't watch Love Island. Molly May? Was it Molly May? That's who got...
Well, she Tommy Fury's missus, like, I'm a fan of the boxing, so I should know that.
Tommy Fury, like, I mean, you should barely even know him at that stage, like, you know, to be honest.
He's a good looking man.
Did he win his fight? He did win his fight.
He did win his fight, yeah. He beat Logan Paul pretty comprehensively in the end, actually. So, I don't know. He's ranked now at this stage as well. I think it was his 6th win, so...
Yeah.
We were debating this last week on a slight tangent on OTB, whether it's good for boxing, bad for boxing. Just not... Look, enjoy it if you want, but like, it's just not something I was going to pay.
It's the most frustrating sport, I'm telling you, boxing, because you just think about... Why are we going to boxing? But you just think about Mayweather and Pacquiao that time, they should have fought. That's why I love the UFC. Like, they'll fight each other, you know?
Yeah.
Boxing lads are just dodging and dodging. Like Fury and Fury and the likes of, let's say, Joshua. Why haven't they fought, like?
Because they were trying to get to a point scale where it would make sense that they both held titles. And if Joshua hadn't lost his, then you would have had your lineal world champion in Fury up against Joshua, who holds the rest of the belts. And it would have been an all-British affair at Wembley. They're going to unify all the belts in one go. That's a big money fight. But Joshua went and lost twice at times.
He lost his head as well. He lost his head after the last one.
He was surely concussed after that one.
He had to be.
You'd wonder.
It was uncomfortable watching, really.
It was.
It's difficult, yeah.
I'll admit I laughed a little bit at the start, and then when he kept holding the microphone and it was about 2 or 3 minutes into his rant, I was there kind of going, "Yeah." If I'm on his management team or I'm Eddie Hearn, I'm walking over and going, "Anthony, give us the mic," and just let Usyk collect the belts and just get off stage.
But sure, does Eddie Hearn really care about that? If it's going to get airtime on social media afterwards, I don't think Eddie Hearn cares.
Ching ching.
I'd go as far as say Eddie Hearn doesn't care too much about most of his boxers, or Katie Taylor would have Croke Park already, and Katie Taylor wouldn't be having to try and promote a fight against Chantal Cameron in the 3 Arena, as opposed to they would 100% have had Serrano 2 in Croke Park, and Eddie Hearn would have said, "Hey, you know what, Katie Taylor, for everything you've done for me, I'll basically take the bet that you'll sell out Croke Park, and if I lose a bit of cash, I'll do it." I think for Eddie Hearn, he's a promoter. It's about making money for him. And I think Joshua has drifted off into the background now that his stock has been hurt as much since that Usyk defeat. Sure, look. Don't know how we end up talking about boxing, but there we go. Yeah. Matches this weekend. So we all complained 2 weekends ago that there was only the one hurling match on the TV when we had Galway against Limerick. Well, you can't move for options to watch games this weekend. Yeah. So before we dive into the fixtures, I'll just tell you the schedule on the TV, because I got it a little bit earlier on today. So 7:15 game on Saturday night is Tip and Waterford, which should be a good one. Semple Stadium Division 1B, that's on TG Cahir. The watching options for Sunday then, Antrim against Laois is being streamed on the BBC iPlayer. I'm not sure if we can stream that down here, but I'm sure there are clever people listening to us right now who will find workarounds if they want to watch the match anyway, and they're not in Ulster. TG Cahir will be showing Clare against Galway, which is the 1:45 start in Ennis. At the same time, you've got Kilkenny against Dublin at Nolan Park, and that's available on the TG Cahir app if you want to watch it live, and it'll be the deferred match on the TV afterwards. And then you've got Cork against Wexford, Porky Queeve, TG Cahir in Division 1A at 3:45. So in theory, you could sit down at 1:45 on Sunday afternoon once you've recovered from watching Tip and Waterford on the Saturday, and you could watch 3 hurling matches in a row on the Sunday. So we have basically, Murph, a festival of hurling this time round. And in this case, some fixtures that actually might matter a little bit as well.
Yeah, there are some fixtures. I suppose, in fairness, a lot of things lined up in last weekend that maybe we didn't learn a whole lot from it, and maybe teams didn't target it as a real test. But there's lots of games there where, you know, again, getting to the latter end of the league, there'll be players putting their hands up. So we may see, you know, a bit of sparks fly in some of the games. But you look at a few of them there, like Cork and Wexford. Wexford having to go to Cork, carrying a few injuries. Cork in good place. Cork will be looking to keep that momentum up. You know, there looks like that could potentially be a one-sided game. Obviously, you know, Westmeath and Limerick. Kilkenny and Dublin, you know, hard one to call in terms of seeing, will Kilkenny, I suppose, step it up again against Dublin? We highlighted maybe a few of Dublin's weaknesses there from last week. Not weaknesses, just this, their shot tendency, tending to shoot from tough angles. Will Kilkenny capitalise on that? So, look, there's a few on Tip and Waterford. Look like that could be a great game as well, because we've kind of said about Waterford that maybe have they been, massively tested in a few of the games. It's hard to know what Waterford are doing really yet. I can't really make sense of what they're trying to do at the moment. Austin Gleeson coming in off the bench, and Tip seems to be quite clinical as well. And that game in Semple Stadium, I think Tip will want to carry on what they're doing. So I think we should know a lot more from this weekend and have a good few more take-ins for next Monday's podcast, definitely.
Yeah. All right, Skehill, let's start our look ahead then by looking at Tip and Waterford, because this is a game, if Tipperary were to win at home, because of the position they're in right now, they'd almost be guaranteed top spot in Division 1B. Obviously, both these teams are trying to get into the semi-finals as things stand, with both undefeated so far. For Waterford, this is a run out ahead of Championship. Semple Stadium is going to be important for them because it's their home venue for the Munster Hurling Championship, so no harm to get a game there before coming out for a couple in the Championship in a month's time as well. How do you see it going on Saturday evening?
I think, am I right in saying, Will, that if there's a head-to-head, let's say there's equal points, head-to-head gets it, is it?
Yeah, so two teams head-to-head. If it's more than two teams on level points, scoring difference.
So Waterford are currently on 5 points, Tip are on 6. So if Tip win this game, they're top of the table, they're guaranteed, because they have the head-to-head on Kilkenny, is that right?
They do, yeah.
So they're virtually guaranteed to semi-final. So it's there's a big prize in offer. I'm kind of along the same thought process as Murph, that I'm just not quite sure. I'm not sure where Waterford are at. Or how they're kind of paced themselves. Like the Ozzy Gleeson one, he seems to come off the bench and influence the game to get them over the line, or influence them to get them towards the line, should I say. So he's obviously still one of their biggest players. So why he's not playing or getting full minutes is questionable.
So is this the game scale to bring him in? Like if he's scoring,
absolutely.
I think he got 4 points twice in games coming off the bench.
Yeah, like
surely now you're putting him out there.
100%, absolutely. He's Waterford's best player, so he needs to be on the pitch. You need your most influential players on the pitch at all times if you don't have a huge supporting cast, right? And they don't. Look, every county doesn't have the riches that Limerick have. So it's like flipping Kilkenny just leaving off Adrian Mullen if he's available, or TJ. You're not going to do that. So in a game of this importance, and I do think it is that you hit the note on the head. It's a precursor for Championship. So I think what Fitzy will be doing is to trying to, I'll say, mirror a Championship run, or mirror Championship preparation. So he's probably going to power a strong 15. Tip at home. Things going well, a bit of life back in the place again down there, you could say, with Liam Cahill at the helm. It's a big game, and I can see there's going to be sparks flying, as I say. And I'd say Tip, they're just moving so well at the minute. I'm looking at Tip to win by 5 or 6, to be honest.
Yeah, I would think, Murph, if you're Liam Cahill coming into this, and with the way the Tipperary have been hurling, and they'll want to back up the performances they've done so far. So they didn't let up on Laois in the first game. Played very well, particularly first half against Kilkenny. And we talked last week about how good they were in a general sense against Dublin in Croke Park the last day. They don't want to put in a dud performance at this stage. Tipperary want to kind of keep this moving now.
Yeah, and I think all indications is that they will keep it moving, because we were speaking about it last week. When I'm looking at Tip at the moment, they just seem to have a clear mind. They get the ball, they're moving it into a good position, they're putting it over the bar. They're not doing anything overly complicated, but the players seem to have a very definite idea of what they're trying to do as a team and what they are doing. Where Waterford at the moment, it's very much hurl for 10 minutes, might be in the game for 15 minutes. They bring in Austin Gleeson and he scores 4 or 5 points, inspirational stuff. It's a bit scattered, where at least Tip are staying consistent. They're performing throughout the game. So at the moment, I definitely think, obviously being with Waterford last year, Liam Cahill again will target this, no more than when we were saying last year that when he comes up against Tipperary, he'll want to, make a statement. I just think that Tip have a better idea of where they are at the moment. I think there's a bit of confidence about them in how they've went about their games and the way they're playing. There's a freshness about them as well. Even without the injuries, they seem to have kind of just, other lads have slotted in. And we're even talking last week about the options. They do, even though they have injuries, they seem to have options in terms of O'Mara moving around, or Mar and so on. So I just think that, I agree completely with Skehill there, that I just think that where Tipperary are at the moment, completely just out of converting what they're the chances they're creating at the moment, I think they'll win by 5 or 6 points. But I do think it's an opportunity. Start Austin Gleeson. I mean, when it comes to Championship, they're going to start him. So unless Davy Fitz is planning and, he's holding them out of the team maybe to try and make other lads step up, I don't really know what it is. But you have to play your best team. You want to start getting shape on your best 15. And, the problem we've spoke about not the problem, but Austin Gleeson has played so many positions over the years. If Davy Fitz comes in and nails down a position where he gets the most out of Austin Gleeson, well, I think that's, a savage platform to go a championship with. But by leaving him out of so many of the games where he's clearly fit, I mean, you wouldn't bring him on if he wasn't. Why leaving him out of the team doesn't really make sense to me. So I'd love to see him starting this weekend, and I'd love to see both teams go at it. But I just think Tipper may be in a better position, but could be eating my words Monday morning nevertheless.
Yeah, I think Skehill will know a little bit more about Waterford over the next 2 weekends, because I can understand why Davy Fitz maybe held a little bit back in reserve and maybe wants to go a little bit experimental in the first few rounds of the league. And I'm sure if Davy Fitz was on with us right now, he would say what hasn't helped are the red cards that they've picked up in these first 3 fixtures as well. But they're playing against Dublin, Laois and Antrim, games they were expected to win. They've come through them unbeaten. So now the real test is Tip and Kilkenny in back-to-back weeks before either potentially going to the semi-finals of the league or going directly to the championship. We should know an awful lot more about where Waterford are under Davy Fitz in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think Davy Fitz has probably used the first 3 games as a method of introducing players and again, a bit like Henry and Galway, seeing what he has. I'm not saying he's disrespecting that position in any way, but you get that sense that it's probably, if there's a grander plan here with him, specifically with the Isaac Gleeson situation. So he's got 2 big tests coming up now, and just the whole, I don't know what you call it, the mood, but just how the mood in Tipperary at the minute, the body language of the Tipperary players, management, it's all so positive, it's all so good, everything seems to be going in the right direction for them. It's not there at Waterford at the minute. You would have thought with a new management team, albeit he's back in his second stint, that there'd be like a bounce in them and a kick. And just we're waiting for that kick to come. I am anyway, waiting to see when this kick comes, when are they going to hit life again under this new management team. And I expect to see something big at the weekend. But I just think the level they're at the minute and what they're producing is not where Tipper at the moment. And like we could sit here next Monday and we could obviously be looking at how Waterford win. Of course we can. It's depending on what way the teams are picked. But I see a good strong near full strength Waterford side going out, put up a big challenge to Tip, and we know an awful lot. Now, in the same breath, we thought we knew a lot about them last year. Do you know what I mean? So and look what happened there. So again, watch this space. It remains to be seen.
Look, punditry and predictions makes a fool of pretty much everybody. Like I think of last weekend, and I consumed a reasonable amount of the media on Saturday and Sunday ahead of Liverpool and Manchester United at Anfield, and everyone was saying this is going to be tight. Eric Ten Hag, the way that Manchester United are playing, there's no way that they'll ever lay down or be heavily beaten. And this has been used as a stick to beat Liverpool with about the Madrid game the week before. And then Liverpool go and win 7-0. So pretty much everyone predicted that wrong. Even people who were saying Liverpool were going to win. I didn't hear anybody say it will be more than Liverpool might nick it 1-0 or this could be a 2-1. There was literally nobody out there saying this was going to be 7-0. So
I backed United -1.
You took a -1, did you?
I backed United -1, yeah.
I should have backed United -8.
So I backed United to win by 2. Like this is the thing you see. It's like I'm looking at the game. That's not a 7, is it? Oh, Jesus! Oh God! Jeez. Yeah. So punditry is tricky. Yeah, you're putting your name on the line there with that one. Yeah, but
that's why I always try to ask you more general questions about where teams are going, as opposed to going, who's going to win? Is this definitely going to be a Clare win? So it's used by a supporter of one of the 2 teams to say that either Paul Murphy or James Skehill are entirely against my county. So,
but it's way easier to track where a team is in championship, obviously. Yeah, because they're all going hammer and tongs. They're all the same fitness levels, and obviously the top 15s are out. In league, it's just very difficult. I did not see Clare and Wexford going the way it was at all last week. But no, I think I said Clare by a point or 2. And they won.
I said Wexford.
That's because they're your neighbours, yeah. But I think that's 20 points, or whatever they got beaten by. That just did not see that coming at all. At all.
Yeah. Like to concede 4-17 in one half is just absolute insanity, really. But that Wexford injury list, by the way, because now been confirmed that Liam Ryan won't hurl for the rest of the league. So his finger injury that he picked up against Galway is a bit worse than they thought. So Paddy Foley is staying in Australia for the moment. And then you've got Lee Chin's got his hamstring issue. Matthew Hanlon hasn't been seen so far. He's got a groin problem. Rory O'Connor has been nursing a knee injury, and I don't think he's back training yet. Mark Fanning has a groin. He might be back for this week, but we're not sure. And Kevin Foley's had a leg injury. I think he's just after returning to training. So, that's basically the core group. There's all-star nominees in there. There's an all-star in Lee Chin. Like, Murph, that's a lot of players to be missing. And I know in no way would we talk about, say, the players that come in for Wexford shouldn't have put up the white flag as easy as they did last week. But that's an incredible amount of hurlers and very important players who were out at the one time. and they're facing a very, very difficult game this weekend when Wexford make the trip to Páirc Uí Chaoimh as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, losing that core group of players, it really opens the floodgates. Even looking back at last week, we were dissecting just, how poor Wexford were. But when that leadership isn't there on the pitch to, I suppose, guide lads through when other teams are getting purple patches, if you don't have those steady hands, those purple patches turns into absolute routings, really, and that's not to make any excuses for Wexford either. But there's a lot of lads there who have played some serious matches for Wexford over the years and stood up at huge times. Like you think of Liam Ryan, for example. Like you picture Liam Ryan, you picture this fella driving out from the full back position, going up, even scoring points and different things. And probably the lad who invokes the biggest reaction out of the Wexford supporters when he comes out with a ball, like some Matty O'Hanlon and these lads, lads who probably don't get the credit they deserve, but have held really important players scoreless in their time for Wexford. So losing those lads and asking a whole batch of new players to come in is a huge ask. It's not where Darragh Egan wants to be either, because he's going down to Wexford now trying to rally the troops, and there's maybe lads in that dressing room who are still reeling from that loss against Clare, now looking at a more formidable task in Cork. So it's not an ideal position by any means. I suppose the only silver lining is that Darragh Egan will look at this and say, well, look, I have these players, hopefully, touch wood, to come back, and then I'll get them all back in time. But nevertheless, getting them back, there'll still be a small bit, a small bit green going into championship, in that they wouldn't have the miles in the legs, they wouldn't be that battle hardened from playing a bit of league matches. So it's not an ideal situation at all for Wexford. And, it's certainly a tough ask for those younger players, inexperienced players coming in, trying to fill these boots of the lads you just mentioned.
Yeah, Skehill, what you need, if you're Darragh Egan right now, is a response to what happened before the break. Like, maybe they're not going to beat 100%. Cork on Sunday afternoon, but they can't afford to hurl the way they did against Clare.
Well, like I saw a tweet from Marcus Rashford today, and he said if they could play straight away today, they would. That's the nature of a sportsman, that when you suffer a heavy defeat or an embarrassing loss, that Wexford suffered last week, you want to get straight back out on the pitch again and kind of right the wrong. And I was just, as Murph was talking, I was kind of thinking to myself there, am I expecting Wexford a big kick in them, or am I expecting Cork to go strong and trounce them below in Páirc Uí Chaoimh? I don't know. I don't know where I'm expecting both. Not both. Respect. I'm saying I'm certainly expecting something out of Wexford. There has to be a big kick. I don't know. Would he have dogged them in training hard to say, will he do it this week? Because you need a response in the match. You can train hard and you can go at each other hammer and tongs after a loss, but ultimately where you get your most confidence is performances. So if they go out against Cork and put in a good performance, and if they get beat, put in a good performance minus the players they're missing, that's a huge positive for them. But if they go back down, if they train fierce hard in the 2 weeks and there's heavy legs, and they go down to Cork where they're high energy down there at the minute, and they suffer heavy loss, that's like 5 steps backwards in my opinion. So I think what they need here first and foremost is a big kick with a big response, ultimately to produce a good performance. So again, while I'm talking, I'm going to say like the Cork are going to probably to win it, but again, similar margins to what I was saying in Tipperary Waterford, 5 or 6. And if Cork get mown, you know what I mean. And next thing, Wexford again, as I said, missing those lads, there's potential there for the floodgates to open.
Yeah, because Murph, Cork are effectively into the semi-finals already with the results that they've had. They probably won't want to leave it to the last weekend to play against Clare to be 100% guaranteed. Maybe they want to get first seeding. Like, there's every incentive here for Cork to go out, do a job on Wexford this Sunday, and then maybe you've got a chance to mix things up against Clare in the last round, knowing that the semi-finals are already secured.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was saying there at the start was Cork will just want to keep their momentum up. So I think Cork will put out a strong team. I know they didn't put out as strong a team against Westmeath, but I think they will put out a strong team with the aim that if all is going as planned, they will start to take a few of them players off and, introduce a few of the players who have performed really well when introduced, and let them, maybe do a bit more of the heavy lifting, but kind of hold a few players in reserve so that you can really go at Clare, because you can expect that Cork will be looking at the Clare game saying, well, Clare, in recent history, go at us, and they will target it. And if there's one thing you don't do is take Clare for granted, at any stage, because they're capable of putting in these savage performances. And particularly now with the likes of Conlon and Tony Kelly back, they're kind of different beasts to what the teams have played at the start of the league. They're starting to get this maybe, well, okay, they only played one game, but they have a bit of vigour back in their play. So I think Cork will look at it and say, look, a clean sweep here would be really good for us. It'd be good for the confidence. It would compound everything we're doing and just say to everyone that, yeah, when we hurl, when we all play as a team and implement what we're talking about in the dressing room, well, we're capable of beating anyone. So I think that's Cork's aim at the moment. I don't think they'll take Wexford for granted. I think they'll get out there, and if at the 40-minute mark, they're up by the 6 or even 10 points, they'll start taking lads off. But I think Wexford, if Wexford hold this to 6 with the crew they have, that's not a bad result for Darragh Egan. And I think that is steadying the ship, which if you said that for any other team nearly over the weekend, you'd say, oh, it's a bad beating. If Kilkenny and Dublin go out and Dublin beat Kilkenny by 6, that's a bad beating. But just coming off the back of what Wexford have come off, if they do that and the players put in a good performance and he sees a different level of attitude and application from the players, I think Darragh Egan will go, okay, that's better and that's what we expect out of you. But I don't see Wexford coming within 6 of Cork.
Yeah, Clare have still got Mean to come back in. They've got Shane O'Donnell hasn't hurled yet this year. They had, as we mentioned there already, Conlon and Kelly back the last day, and what a difference and lift they gave to the team. So Clare got 2 wins from 3 so far. Take on your county, Galway, this weekend, Skehill in Ennis, and there's every incentive for Clare to win this game. See what happens with Limerick's last game. They probably, I would imagine they probably won't get to a semi-final, but they can give themselves a chance by winning this game against Galway big time at the weekend in Ennis. How do you see this game going?
This is a big game too, Will. It's a big game for both teams. Galway have 2 points, Clare have 4. And that's why I asked about the head-to-head earlier on. If Galway can manage a result in this one, which is going to be difficult on that pitch, it's difficult. Clare always perform at home, and they've always got a good crowd too. Let's just say they put out 2 strong 15s. It's hard for me to see with the way both teams are playing at the moment. There's no evidence to say that Galway will top Clare. Galway did produce a lacklustre performance against Cork and kind of for large periods against Limerick. So you're saying they haven't got huge momentum. They haven't got an awful lot going well at the moment, you could say. And then Clare on the back end are after coming off a big victory, so where confidence is high. And I always say with teams, the best method of improvement is recruitment. So when you get someone like Tony Kelly back and John Conlon, it just adds another layer of improvement onto them. So I'm hoping to see Galway probably introduce more of the regular starters that we've become accustomed to, and see, can we, again, like you were saying more earlier on, get a settled 15 and get kind of our big players on the pitch early, which is like the Conor Whelans, the Brian Cannons, they didn't start against Limerick. So get them going and see, can we top it clear. It's a tough game for me to call. I don't think there'll be a point to win it. But this is head over heart. I'd be calling Clare at the moment.
If Galway were to lose Skehill and say they end up in a position where the league finishes up that they beat Wexford in the first round, and we know all about Wexford's trouble since, and say they beat Westmeath in the last round but have lost all the rest of the games, would that be an incredibly disappointing league for Galway, or would it really matter?
I think where Galway, where we see Galway at the minute, locals call regions, where we see them and we see where their potential can get to, I'd be disappointed. Success to me, every year I do it for Galway, I say, what's a successful year for Galway? I say it's getting out of the group in the league, it's winning the Leinster, and it's been very competitive semi-final to see where can you get to a final. At present terms. In years previous it would be winning the whole lot, but at present time is, can we get to a final, an Ireland final? Whereas now I look at it and I go, we haven't played particularly well. I haven't seen an awful lot of new lads come in and put their hand up, to be honest. Cathal Manning's after doing his hamstring again, so it's like he's a huge loss to us. So there's not a lot of positives. But then on the other hand, I'm saying, we've got guys to come back. We haven't really integrated the whole of the Thomas's guys. Finch and David, and I said Brian Cannon has been with the Fitzgibbon and hasn't really got. So the whole thing hasn't got rolling yet, if you know what I mean. So I'm more than Waterford the next 2 weeks. You want to see what they're going to produce, because they haven't done well in the last 3 weeks with the two. Now, albeit against the 2 top level quality opposition teams. So if we lose to Clare, Will, and that means our last game is Westmeath, isn't it?
Yeah.
Westmeath, yeah. It would be, it's a bad league. Do you know what I mean? To be honest, if we lose against the big teams, if you want to put it that way. So Wexford, as we said, they're kind of in dire straits at the moment with injuries. So you'd be expecting a win there, which we did. And then after that, it's Westmeath that you expect to win there, and then not top of one of the bigger teams in the group. That's disappointing.
What do you think, Murphy? Your heart doesn't have to come into this at all. Clare and Galway. Yeah,
with Clare, anytime Clare and Ennis, I just go, Jesus, that's a tough. And that's not, a flippant thing that you look at every team and say in their home ground, Ennis is a tough place to go, and we've always had tough battles with them, coming out with a few beatings from Ennis as well. So yeah, I'd actually agree with Skehill in this one. Like, my head is, this is going to be a tight one. I think Galway may find it hard to get a bit of change out of the Clare defence, and Clare just, kind of having this energy they seem to have in up in Ennis. In my head is just telling me like Clare by 2 points, for example. And I don't know where I'm really pulling that from, because it's actually quite a tough one to call. I fully believe that Galway have the players there and the personnel to go and rack up a great score on Clare, but for some reason just can't seem to get that done at the moment. They're kind of stuttering at the moment. And I do think they'll get it right, because I do think that just the quality players they have, they won't, they're not going to fall flat. But just this game, coming off the back of the Limerick match, even though Galway weren't far off it, I just see kind of Clare causing them problems down in Ennis, being very tight, Tony Kelly causing problems, and my gut is just telling me, Clare by 2 points at the moment.
Well, Skehill, Anthony Nash was saying to us on Friday, and it's always a really good chat between Ger and Anthony on a Friday afternoon, but he was saying that his one concern for Galway at the moment is just the pressure on Conor Whelan within that forward line to shoulder a lot of the responsibility for scores. And his feeling was, in some of the games they have coming up, that maybe Galway might be a little bit short up front. Would that be a concern that you'd share?
It's a concern, but I see the concern wouldn't develop to worry. If I was heading into towards worrying, I'd be a different kettle of fish. But it was kind of a similar situation last year. If you remember, Conor was leading the charge and leading it quite well from the front. And then we were coming up against Limerick, and I was thinking, geez, Sean Finn's going to mark Conor Whelan now, and how is this going to affect Galway? And in fairness, Galway performed fierce well. It's just that I think Conor is probably indirectly taking up the mantle that Joe probably had with Galway for years. Not quite at the same level, obviously, with all the furore around Joe for years. But I think he has that mantle. I think he carries it quite well, to be honest. Body language is always good. His work rate is seriously impressive, and it's just a question then for the supporting crew, what can they do with him, do around him. But again, Cahill being injured, I'm just praying that he's getting right for the championship, that he's going to be, because if he's probably Conor's biggest supporting cast member, the link, let's say, in there, the forwards. You need Cahill flying it in conjunction with Conor for Galway to be effective. He's a huge loss. And then I also think we're going to have to probably transition Joseph Cooney up out of the backs and put him back into where we've probably grown accustomed to it for years in Galway in the forwards. Just because I think we need a big man up there who can win and run direct and shoot on sight as well at times. So there's going to be a bit of rejigging, alright. But I don't think Conor's on his own. I wouldn't say that. That's probably a bit unfair.
If Joseph Cooney moves up, who do you play in your half back line then?
Well, you've Dahi to come back. Dahi's a huge player to come back, in fairness. You've got Finton to come back. So that's 2 of your starting backs that you have played against Limerick. So they're probably going to come back into... I could probably see Dahi. I'm always on the side of Dahi going back into full back. I know Garage Mack is doing well at full back at the moment.
You full back and early back at 6 then?
I put Garage to 6 because again, they're two supreme athletes, but Dahi is just exceptional at full back, to be honest. He's got that great mix like Murph was on about last week. He's like a cornerback at fullback, but he's just so strong on the high ball. He can do both. He can run and he can contest early. So you've got Finton to come in and you've got Dahi to come in. So that's 2 of your backs straight away sorted. And so then with Joseph coming up in the forwards, again you get another big unit of man up there. So I don't think we're concerned. We always have good backs, to be honest. Always. It's just our concession rate. I know the last 2 weeks doesn't really apply in this comment, but our concession rate is never really that high. We're never conceding 4 goals and 25 points, you could say.
It was only 4-24 against Cork. Go on.
Yeah, that's why I said my comment. This is the league is less, but in terms of it's scoring efficiency, scoring ability. Yeah. So that's a concern, not a worry.
Nolan Park then. Wasn't a good performance at Nolan Park last time, Murph, when Tipperary came into town. Kilkenny are going to have to obviously improve on that, but it seems to be getting to a point, just reading some of Derek Ling's comments, that the Ballyhale players are now coming back into the fore and maybe coming back into the team. And look, we could be accused of underestimating how important that spine of Ballyhale players are in the Kilkenny team still.
Yeah, and I think what the Ballyhale lads really do is just bring out the best in the lads around them as well. It's not just the case that Kilkenny lads are leaning heavily on them, but the bit of creativity from the Ballyhale lads is is huge in terms of opening up the players around him. Like if you look at Owen Cody does what he kind of wants on the pitch in terms of he drifts, he goes at the ball, he'll catch you with his right, he'll catch you with his left, he'll do a solo. Like there was clips going around there from the county final with Ballyhale and James Stevens. The Ballyhale boys, there's one, a clip that everybody saw, I think, where Ballyhale was just playing around with the ball and they just waited until they transitioned it across to the far side. Evan Shefflin pops up and over the bar. That's what Ballyhale kind of bring to it, and those players in particular. They create this kind of freedom within and a freedom within the play, in where they get a ball, they move around, they bring other lads into the game, they maybe take their score themselves. And if you look at the Tipperary match, Kilkenny were just a bit disjointed. Maybe there was too many new players on the pitch. Not to say too many new players, but to expect them to have a free-flowing game in which they were just popping balls over, making right decisions. You can guarantee now with having the likes of Owen Cody, and obviously enough we have to wait to see what the team is going to be the weekend. But you'd imagine the likes of Owen Cody will be there. You don't know who else from Ballyhale will be there, but the fact that they'll just have influence on the players around them, they'll also have a kind of a calming type of figure, because the centre of attention will be those lads as well. That it'll just bring a bit more freedom of play into the Kilkenny play as well. I think Kilkenny, there's no harm. They got a little bit of kick in the arse against Tipperary, which is never a harm, at this stage of the year. Again, went out and look, again, not to be taken away from, they played against Laois and they did what was expected of them. They didn't get drawn into a dogfight. They put up a big score. They came away there with the 2 points. So I think Kilkenny will look at this game and go, okay, playing against Dublin, tipping long, they'll score if you let them to score, but we want to put pressure on these lads and we want to, I suppose, step up again from the Tipperary performance. So yeah, I think the likes of even David Blanchfield now, he had a good impact coming in against Tipperary as well. I think a few lads, there's been learning points that Kilkenny will take from the last few games, and I don't think there'll be any sort of panic whatsoever, because there are younger lads even putting a hand up there as well. So I think Kilkenny, it's a big test for them. Well, not a big test, but it's a good test for them to go out Nolan Park. Again, say this is Dublin coming to town. We traditionally don't lose to Dublin in Nolan Park. We go out there, we put up a big win. We keep this, we keep improving. We keep looking to learn a few lessons from each game. And, the last thing Kilkenny want to do this weekend is go out and lose a scrappy game to Dublin and then kind of be asking, okay, well, what are we doing here? Which I don't expect them to do. I think they'll have enough for Dublin. And I think they'll certainly, as we were talking about last week, we'll put pressure on Dublin to shoot from those areas, kill Dublin's momentum by maybe forcing Dublin to shoot a few wides. You'll probably see a man marking job as well on Burke as well, just to maybe take his influence out of the game. So Kilkenny,
who do you put in Donald Burke if you're Derek Lyng this weekend?
I would have said the likes of Paddy Deegan maybe. Paddy Deegan has enormous running in him. Like, first of all, you're going, right, I want to put someone on this fella that has huge running, and that's Paddy Deegan. Are you laughing now because I'm going to say Butler? Eh?
Yeah. I'm waiting for
the Mikey Butler Saxon's ready.
Mikey Butler, yeah. Well, you're just trying to think, where is Donald Burke going to play? Is he going to be out around the middle? I don't think they'll put Butler on him if he's going to be out there. They might just, but then again, you don't want to commit one of your influential midfield players or not even half forwards, but someone around that area to man mark him. You want someone just to go, listen, that's your job. And the reason I think the likes of Paddy Deegan or these is that they have an enormous amount of running. You want a fella that can just go with a lad wherever he goes on the pitch and he won't be found wanting in legs. Not saying there's anyone else there, but that's what I'm looking at. So,
sorry, Murph, to interrupt you. Didn't Mikey Butler do Cathal Mannion and Tony Kelly last year?
He did, yeah.
He was on the boat, was he?
He was on a boat, yeah.
And the boat, they were kind of anonymous.
Anonymous, exactly.
Yeah.
So look, if he is playing, if Mikey Butler is playing, I think it's a no-brainer, because he seems to be able to just go out and mark lads. But then also when the game opens up, he comes out with a few balls. He doesn't actually, he's not just anonymous himself. So it depends, But I do think Kilkenny will go, because we said it last week, of any team who won't play in Dublin now, there's an elephant in the room that if we keep Donald Burke quiet here from play, potentially we're holding Dublin back from maybe 4 or 5 points then on the scoreboard, which in any game is huge. So I think Kilkenny will target that. You will see a man marking job done on them. And after that, Kilkenny will look to play their own game and keep Dublin out to the channels, shooting from wide areas.
Maybe someone like Danny Suffolk comes in and be more important this week than he was against Tipperary before the break. But I would think if I'm Micheál Donoghue this weekend, Skehill, I'd be sitting down showing the video of last year in the Leinster Championship and saying, the one thing you don't do at Nolan Park is get bullied like you did at Parnell Park last year.
Yeah, and they did. And we spoke about it after that game, I actually remember as well, is that they had no plan B at all. And just that their general basics of gameplay was terrible. With respectfully speaking, their ball retention, we always talk about the full forward line. It's a big thing for me. If we send in 30 balls in their full forward line, well, then half of them have to go over the bar, half of them have to stick. And there was a passage in that play last year. I can't remember who was on the end of it. I think it was did Billy Ryan get a goal against Dublin last year in the second half?
Yeah, he did. Mossy Keown got in the first half.
Like that was just the touch work. You know, is everything you expect off a team that's operating in a slick manner. Whereas Dublin was the opposite. Any ball that was coming in was going out. And I think I know Michael wasn't there. He wasn't part of that whole setup. But I think what he wants to see is probably a continuance of the improvement. Like, and they are improving, to be honest. They are. And Nolan Park, again, we talked about Innes. Nolan Park is very difficult to go. You've got a mix there of Kilkenny. The last game they played in Nolan Park was obviously the tip one. Kilkenny are going to be pumped as well. So it's going to be a huge challenge for him. But I just think Michael will want to see a gradual continuance. Like, what will be detrimental here to this group now will be Kilkenny putting them down by 10 or 12 points. That's a stark, decline in improvement, you could say, for me. So I say he just wants to build slowly, keep getting to the Leinster Championship and take it from there.
Yeah, game I'm going to on Sunday is Westmeath and Limerick in Mullingar. I think for Westmeath, the whole key, Murph, is to put in a performance like the Cork game the last day, where, as we spoke about last week, they won the second half. They went down by 6 points, having trailed by 9 at one stage. And like that, in a way, will be, I think, a big inspiration coming into the few big games they have coming. I mean, for Westmeath, the last two matches aren't going to matter a huge amount because of the results. They know at this stage, with the way that things have shaped up so far, that they're going to be in the relegation playoff against either Antrim or against Laois. But important that against Limerick this week, they don't let the game run away from them. They don't want a situation like the first match where Clare put a score on them. They want it to be more like the Cork game last week.
Yeah, I think Westmeath will look at this game and go, they'll look to try and take away periods of like 10 minutes and different things where they hurled really well against Limerick and maybe implemented their own game in that they moved the ball around Limerick quite well, got scores out of it, that they can reference then in the weeks to come to say, look, every week we go out, we're not going to be playing Limerick, but this is what we were able to do for 10 minutes against Limerick. We equaled them for scores, or we outdid them in this period, or when we worked the ball from the back line out, we were able to do it against Limerick. We worked it all the way up to the full forward line. They look for all them nuggets to take away, and and rightly so, because it's a great opportunity. Granted, look, I hate being here every week and kind of erring on the side of moral victories and stuff for Westmeath, but they can take a lot from this game. Okay, no one's expecting them to go out here and have this outrageous victory, but there's little chunks that they can take that if they're able to implement their game, if they're able to, in certain positions, dominate certain positions, if they can, or hurl really well against their counterparts, they can bring that forward and go, well, look what we're able to do against the All-Ireland champions, against this apparently, loaded kind of a panel that Limerick have of a conveyor belted players. It shouldn't matter who comes off the bench or who Limerick are playing. They're apparently, that have this conveyor belt coming through, that any Westmeath player who lines up against the Limerick lad the weekend, if you win your position or you hurl really well for periods, you can take a lot from that. And I think that's what they look to do. I don't think they're under any illusions of, the task at hand, but they certainly can come away. And when they're doing their analysis in a few weeks, go, guys, look at this 10-minute block here. Look at the work rate here. Look at the hooks and blocks we got in. Look how we hounded. Look how we fought for this ball. Look how we turned this ball over, worked it up the pitch and got a score. There's loads of stuff they can take from this. And it could be one of the most fruitful experiences in one way if they go and take as much as they can from it and really just go at it, see what they can do, see what they produce. And again, combined with the Cork game where they beat them, let's say in the second half, there's another feather in their cap where they can point to it and say, well, look what we can do when, everybody is pulling in the right direction and, our kind of stars align, really.
Yeah, like Skehill, will Limerick mind getting an extra couple of games, given that we've spoken so much over the last, particularly last 2 or 3 years, just as collectively, we all talked about how Limerick have used 18, 19 players for the best part with all the success they've had. A few new lads coming in, a few of them have shown quite well at college level this year. Maybe this is going to be an opportunity to maybe have a further look at some of them. Probably the same with the Wexford game in Limerick's last match. Will John Kiley mind going into a semi-final ahead of playing in the Munster Championship? Like, do extra games matter to Limerick this year? Because last year they had such a finesse run in because they went out of the league early.
Yeah, like I was interested to listen to the Morrissey's talk after the Galway game. Both Dan and Tom, when they were saying like that I know the perception is that Limerick don't, I use the word loosely, care about the league, but certainly the players do. And I think John Kiley has the ability at the moment now to utilise, certain players at certain times. So like, for example, we'll see probably a weakened Limerick team, if you want to call them that, from what we usually associate with them. And I think he'll use the league. I think I honestly believe if he gets to a semi-final, they're going to win it. That if John Kiley comes out with the group and they're in the semi-final, Lockwood hurling, they're going to keep going. That's just the way I think Limerick have developed that at the minute. And in the same breath, if they don't come out of the group, I don't think he's going to mind too much, you know, because obviously he knows what he has. So it's like there's pros and cons to it all. I think it's how far they get. Do you know what I mean, Will? If it's how far they get, if they progress in the final, they're going to go all the way for it. I think they're going to put when they're this far, they may as well stay going. But if in the same breath, if they have more preparation time in weeks training because they don't make semi-final, you know, so be it. So we'll see. We will see a weak in Limerick team this week. And like Murph, I was just again your telepathy. You're on this week because there's thinking thoughts on my head. I was like, will Westmeath develop a set of measurables, you know, for this game? Like, for example, let's not concede a goal. Let's get X amount of tackles. You know what I mean? That's why I agree with you wholeheartedly there. That they'll probably look at this game in a different mindset than normally approach the game. Take their set of measurables and box ticking exercise. Can we keep free count down? Can we stop this man scoring X, Y? You know, so that's probably the target for them, because when you go up against such quality opposition, like you said, the realistic view is they're not going to win the game, truthfully speaking. So, you know, but like Limerick, again, do you think, so obviously they're missing Hayes, you know, but they have so many good players at the minute, it's not a case of resting players. Do you know what I mean? Like, they've got a juggernaut of players at the minute that whatever team they put out, and I said weakened, it still would challenge any of the top teams. So they've just got an embarrassment of riches, as we said before. So yeah, I don't think John Kelly matters too much. Will, I think the proof is in the pudding, and the last 3 years have been exceptional for Limerick. So he's quite content to know that the formula he has is working.
Yeah, and maybe he'll be happy enough to get rid of that narrative that we all kind of have in our mind, which is, Limerick don't care that much about the league. If they go and win the league, he'll be the first one to turn around.
They're dirty.
Yeah, exactly. They're throwing hand passes around. They're not going for goals. There'll be all sorts of arguments that will be used against them. They're too happy just to rack up the points. And then, Murph, game of the weekend. I gave this last billing because of how important it is, which is the game in Cork Park at 1 o'clock on Sunday, which is Antrim against Laois, because the losers of this game, because of the head-to-head rule, are going to end up playing Westmeath in the relegation playoff. I don't know how to call this, because last year it looked like Antrim had everything moving in the right direction for them before they played Laois, and Laois looked like they were in trouble, and Laois turned them over in Port Laois. This year again, Laois have hurled well at stages in the games that they've played so far, shipped a heavy enough beating to Kilkenny the last day, while Antrim have been in the match for the best part, like played very well against both Kilkenny and against Waterford particularly, showed good resolve at times in the Dublin game, even though I thought Dublin were comfortable enough winners, maybe more comfortable than the scoreline suggested. But you would think, based on what we've seen in the first 3 weeks, that this is going to be an Antrim win. But yet, I wouldn't totally rule out Laois winning Cork Park on Sunday. No,
I wouldn't. It seems to be kind of, the way I look at this game now is it's its own little story in the game itself, because going from last year, again, like you said, Antrim were showing a little bit better than Laois last year, probably a lot better than Laois last year, and had a few good wins, and then suddenly they go down to Port Laois and Laois turned them over. I think Antrim will look at this, by being beaten by Laois last year in Port Laois. First of all, they'll turn around and say, these lads can come up to Corrigan Park and beat us. I think the crowd will be behind them. What we associate as well with Corrigan Park, particularly when the crowd know that this is an important game, is the crowd being on the back of the Antrim lads, cheering every sort of a pass, every sort of a shot, a shoulder. They'll be on their back like that. And one thing you can't fault this Antrim team for is, when they are tuned in, they're riled up for games and they really go at it. So I think Antrim will look at this to take, Skehill's phrase there, as a measurable game. This is a game that they should win. So why we should go out and win this, and really be tuned into that, be tuned into the fact that recognize this is a game that you're expected to win. Deal with that pressure now of, okay, all the rest of the days you're going out and you're hoping to turn over Waterford or turn over Dublin or whoever, and you get away with it if you don't, because people say you're not expected to win it. Well, now you're expected to win this game. Go out and win it. Put up a good performance, take something from the game, and maybe if you feel that Laois shouldn't have bet you last year, we'll go out and right the wrong now. So there is things here that Antrim should be going for. I do tip Antrim to win this game. But like you said, you can't write off Laois, because they have shown to be a team that will go at lads. They had great performance against Waterford as well. It's just maybe barring a few mistakes and Austin Gleeson coming on, they were performing really well in that game. Didn't really perform, or maybe weren't let perform against Kilkenny last week. So you can't write Laois off, but I just fancy, Corrigan Park, Antrim crying out for a win now at this stage. Too many nearlies, as you were saying, Will, like too many near wins which aren't good enough. So I just think that if Antrim attack this right and have the aggression that we associate with Antrim, I fancy them to win it by, maybe five points.
Because my read on Antrim's form would be, after they lost the game against Laois last year, they went into the relegation playoff against Offaly, hurled very well to stay up that day in Navan. Then they went on to win the Joe McDonagh to go back up as a senior county at championship level and in Division 1 for this season. I think they've performed pretty well so far, as we already mentioned, in the league. So there's about a year of good form behind Antrim at this stage. They've got to get that feeling now that if they're going to kick on, this game is really important. Absolutely, and I think the players know that themselves. I think that if they're trying to take steps of progression, this is a game that they should be winning too. Like, I agree with Murph. Like, I'm looking at this game as a complete neutral, and I'm saying Antrim should be locking this down by 4 or 5 because everything is in their favour at the moment. Like, I've never personally played up in Cork Park, but we've seen enough evidence, to say that it's again another tough venue to go with. Quite a rapturous crew. They're so passionate about the hurling in Antrim, so all that will get pieced in together and thrown at Laois. Do you know what I mean? Simply put, So like Laois are starting this game 4 or 5 points down. That's probably the value that Antrim would place on their local venue. So, and they've got a good management team, good manager. They've done all the right things. Where they were 2 or 3 years ago in comparison to now is chalk and cheese, to be fair. Like, Antrim they seem to be in the conversation every week in some capacity, putting in competitive performances against big teams. So they're looking at this and they're saying everything's probably in our favour to go and put in a good result here. And that's what you expect. Whereas Laois, on the other hand, they've kind of been, very good against Waterford, start, a bit hit and miss. Again, new management team, etc. Decimated by injuries last year, so they're kind of just trying to get the train going, I suppose. And if they do manage to go up there and come down with a victory, that's a season starter. That's a kickstarter for a positive season. That's a huge result for them, regardless of where they're at, let's say, nationally. That's a huge result for them. And that has the power. This type of result, if they can go up to Antrim into a difficult venue, turn them over, when there's so much on the line, that's a kickstarter. And you wouldn't know where they want to go then after that. But they're probably looking at this fixture, as you said, at the start of the year and go, this is the one that we have to iron out and have to take care of business here. So it's a very, very tough ask for Laois, but I'm giving to Antrim by 5. Yeah, I think Laois should be very conscious as well. They'll probably feel, look, they won the second half against Kilkenny the last day, but they were so far behind at half time that feels a little bit different. Yeah, it feels different to Westmeath against Cork, where that game was much closer. If you're miles behind at half time and then you win the second half, it feels a little bit different. And Westmeath have had Laois's number as well. So I think there's a bit of pressure on Laois here, knowing that Westmeath will be the relegation playoff. And the last thing Laois want to be doing is going into the Joe McDonagh having already been relegated down to Division 2A. So this is a crucial couple of weeks coming up for them, a massive, massive fixture. That's on the BBC iPlayer at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. So they're the games for this weekend. Have a look at the comments. Skehill, you can respond to TV Street, who seems to have really enjoyed the fact that he got 3 horseshits out of you. That was the PC response. Well, as PC as you get, probably. It wasn't a knockout game, was his response in the YouTube video, and he was laughing in the live chat, I think, as the video premiered at 10 o'clock last Monday as well. It still meant an awful lot to Limerick to win their first Mick Mackey Cup, because it was the first ever time the actual cup was presented. Of course, the Celtic Cross medal supersedes everything else, but I got a triple horseshit out of Skehill, and I wasn't even trying. Great success is how TV Street is taking it. What's that word they use nowadays? Triggered? Yeah. was I slightly triggered a little bit? You were pretty triggered. Like, I didn't think it was. The funny part is, I didn't think it was actually that crazy a statement that he was making. I don't think he was saying, like, the All Ireland doesn't matter. I think the point he was trying to make was Clare were up there with Limerick in a game that mattered an awful lot to them. Yeah. And that was the reading from it. And you were like, horseshit. What you're saying, Will, like, it was a very reasonable statement and he just got an unreasonable reaction. That's basically what happened there. Your words, not mine, Mr. Murphy. Yeah, but that's the power of perception. Snowflake Skehill, that's what they call it. That I am not, anyway. I perceive that comment way differently. You know what I mean? Yeah. People make these statements every now and then, and they're so outlandish to my brain, right? that I'm going, no, what is he after saying? I will categorise that one there. Well, we'll get to our voice note in a few minutes and we can see where we are in that. Patrick Coleman, who is a long-time watcher and listener to the pod, said, despite all Limerick's dominance in the 3 games so far, Murph, they lost the first game to Cork, losing a good lead, only won by 6 against a not fully top player Clare, and then by 5 against a weak in Galway. Are Limerick really that far ahead of everyone else, Murph? Yeah, they are. Do I need to elaborate on that? in show. That's next. Well, like, next. Again, we probably covered it in the first pod, but against Waterford, or not Waterford, Cork, did Limerick have 4 weeks work as a group together? Those lads come back from travelling, probably only had about two weeks training, 3 weeks training. Yeah.
what I've seen from Limerick so far is they are in third gear at the moment. That's not them insulting other teams. That's them just cutting their cloth to measure. They're just going out there, winning games, doing what they need to do. If a team gets them in arms touching distance, they push them back again and just keep the scoreboard going. They're like, yeah, they are. At the moment, they are. But that's not to say I don't believe at all it's a foregone conclusion what's happening. They are the top dogs. They're out in front. But that just means that there's a bullseye on them. There's teams that are going to come at them left, right, and centre. Like you look at Limerick's games through the championship, week on week, they'll be the most entertaining games because they'll just have kamikazes coming at them like of teams trying to turn them over and kickstart their year. That's why Limerick's games, not only do they play a great brand of hurling, but that's what they're going to get. And they're going to have to sustain that right up to the Ireland final. Other teams invariably will have games that are just flops, you know, because whatever's going on in the background. But no one will miss the Limerick game. No one will fail to turn up. They'll all have a go at it for 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. But they're out in front and they can afford, if you can win an All-Ireland without Keane Lynch or, you know what I mean, like without Peter Casey and these lads, you have a savage panel, you have savage confidence. I mean, I'm just going to stop there because it's just, they're miles out in front, yeah.
Is that the only way to beat them, Murph? Is to somehow get into a situation where you come out with manic intensity, as Paul O'Connell would say, and just get to a higher pitch than they are in a game and beat them? Is that the only way to beat them?
What I think you have to do is you have to get out and hit them so hard, which in itself, I nearly stopped there and said that's a very hard thing to do to this Limerick team because physically, mentally and everything, they're such a strong team. Get them punch drunk, like actually hit them so hard for the first 20 minutes. And I think Waterford almost did it back in 21, was it, when the water break was still in and the first 15 minutes in the semi-final they actually went at them and the water break killed it. It was just this break that took the stem the tide for them. But yeah, you have to go out and get them punch drunk. But I mean, I was looking at Galway last week and where it's a very hard thing to describe. It's an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to do. And I was only thinking back comparing to them what we did in 2019, but I even think they've evolved since then anyway. But it's kind of a case, you have to tell your team, right, first of all, physically, when they have the ball, you have to go out and hit them hard. You want to sit back, but also, once you smell blood, push up as hard as you can on them, but do it as a unit, which that in itself is a very hard thing to do. Because when I look back at our game in 2019, there was times where we sat back really well, won the ball, our half forwards came back and won it. We drove forward. But there was also times when, and I think one ball where we turned over Tom Morrissey got the ball and four lads swarmed him. And they just said, well, if he does manage to get the ball out of here, Limerick are on the attack. So there's absolutely no way he can get the ball out. And there was that mentality of the team completely understood what you're doing. So for any team to beat Limerick at the moment, you have to bring something that's absolutely incredibly ferocious in terms of intensity. Do it from the start. Make Limerick doubt, again, I say, which could be a very hard thing to do, doubt that they can actually win this game. Rack up a score of possibly being ahead by 7 or 8 points in the first 20 minutes. You have to do it. But we even saw against Limerick or against Tipperary in the Munster final a few years ago, you can be up by 10 points at halftime and Limerick will beat you. So it's an enormous task at the moment.
Murph, if you get that far ahead, Murph, play the lotto.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
If you tick all them boxes, play the lotto. Because your luck is in.
But this is it, as in it. But there's no point in sugarcoating it. For anything that does beat them, it'll be a mammoth task, and that's what you're going to see is this performance, which I don't think anybody will have forecast, foreseen coming, and that'll be part of it. It's almost has to be an ambush at this stage. It has to be.
But do you not think as well, Murph? There's a question in of sustainability. Do you know, they're so finely conditioned that if you do hit them, get them punched drunk, like you said, and go at them, they're going to come back at you. How do you sustain it?
But sure, it's the thing of when we bet in 2019, lads were saying, oh, sure, if they had another 5 minutes, they would have bet us. And we were, sure, our argument was, there isn't another 5 minutes. We bet them in enough time. But that was just enough. That was just getting over the line, falling over the line, everything kind of going right for you, balls breaking, all these different things. So, you do need lots of stuff. You need an enormous amount of stuff. But they're the standard bearers at the moment. It's like asking, how do you beat Dublin? As Dublin were on their way to the 6 in a row, 3 years in, how do you beat them? Well, this is how you beat them. It's hard to see it at the moment this year, how teams are going to do it. But that will, that gap will close and people will do it. Will it be this year? Who knows? Will it be in the next 2 years? Who knows? But that's what we're going to have to see teams step up to do, is completely match them and outdo them.
But you're going to have to as well. I would always be a big advocate of focusing on yourself. Yeah. The Limerick is the type of opposition. So if Galway are playing any other county, I mean this hand on heart. If Galway focus on Galway, I'd be confident we'd take them down, But with Limerick, I just think you have to analyse them so well and have your game, I won't say tailored, but at least adapted a bit against them. Like you can't let Barry Nash get the ball, you can't let Declan Hanlon come up the pitch, you can't get Hegarty win, and when you piece all that together, it's a mammoth task.
It is, and like you can't, if you think, like, one thing I would say is the rock that teams will die on is where you see people reference Limerick and say, oh, other teams have to do that. If you try and replicate Limerick, you'll never beat them. So they're ahead of you. They're ahead of you. They're a moving target. Yeah.
They're 5 years into their system.
They're 5 years into it. And plus as well, they're the best at their system. So you try and copy their system, they'll just beat you at their system. So you actually have to develop a new game or a game plan, not even a full new game plan. But for example, a team might go, lads, we're not delivering balls into the full forward line. We're going to come right out our full forward line. We're going to go for points. We're not going to go for goals. And have them go, right, what do we do with Barry Nash now and Sean Finn? Do we let them come out, which they're more than capable of doing? But it's just a curveball like that, whereby you're now not playing by the rules anymore. You're also not playing Limerick's game plan because you're not going to beat them at that. You're just going to go throw the rule book out the window and go, right, for one game, let's try and ambush them. Let's try and play. But it's a crazy task at the moment. It's a huge task.
Skehill, on a very related point, Conor McMahon was in contact on the YouTube. Limerick have conceded something like 11 goals in their last 12 knockout championship games. There's not something like, he clearly knows that stat. But anyway, why don't other counties target scoring more goals against them when clearly outscoring them has proven very difficult, which comes off very nicely on the back of Murph's point. Colin McCarthy, who is a Limerick fan, was in contact in the replies, and he said, much easier said than done, to be fair, and also Limerick are the kings of the strategic, in brackets, cynical foul 30 to 40 yards out from goal. Not too many players get in near goal against Limerick. And that's a very fair point. It's hard to think of too many, say, chances that teams have had against Limerick where they're one-on-one with Quaid. Generally, you have to take your chances when they come against Limerick if you're going to get goals. They're not a team that cough up that many clear chances.
Well, two things. Number one is I think they're fabulous on the high ball as a collective in the full back line. So Finn, English, Morrissey, Nash, they're all excellent on the ball. It's rare. Like, one image stands out in my head last year was Sean Finn got the ball over Conor Cooney's head. Do you remember that? In the dying moment. In the dying moments, like, so that's one method of getting the ball in there nearly declined. They're also the best team at exiting their own defence and the best team at stopping runners coming through their half back line. So, like, if you have that, right, and then we all know what they're like at midfield and half forward line in terms of their work rate, the power ball they play. So that zone is chocker-blocked day and night with Limerick. So when you add up all those together, geez, it's very hard. It's very hard to get through them, So, like, it's very hard to deliver the ball, let's say, from deep because you've got the bodies in front of you. Very hard to run through them because they've always got cover. And how many times have we seen it in the ball gets delivered in long? Declan Hanlon is the first man there to take a receiving pass off an Ash or off a Finn. They're just, like, it goes back to Murphy's point. They're 5 years into a system and they've it fine-tuned. And defensively, they're excellent. They are excellent. Like, and yes, they conceded a couple of goals, fair enough. But I think they probably look at that and say it's not a major concern, if you know what I mean, because they're topping off teams with 35 points. 50 shots. Like, they use. I honestly don't think teams actually focus enough on. I'm going into a different point now, Will. On the puck house, right? So every team, training, they're always practicing switch work, let's say, in open play and situation play. But like the puck house, Limerick are the first team in my memory anyway that I've looked at the opposition puck out and said, this is a chance for us to take it off you. You have the ball now. Now we're going to give it back to us because we're going to get to ground, outwork you, and then build our attacks off opposition ball. I'm going to do it the next game, in the next championship game with Limerick. When the opposition have their puck out, what do Limerick actually score off the opposition puck out? I think they could average, it's something like probably 8 or 9, at least 10 points, and that's kind of how do you put it? Limerick are so fine tuned that even when they don't have the bloody ball, they're using it against you. Do you know what I mean?
The return of Skehill's notebook is what I'm looking for.
I am. It's right here, and she's ready to be, and it's a new one. It's brand new.
Jesus, lovely.
Yeah, and it's actually from Lyra to State, which would be more.
I tell you, I knew you didn't buy it anyway.
Well, I tell you one thing. While I mentioned Lyra, and you know about this as well.
I'm not sure you meant to take them with you, but go on.
Yeah, he has the Bible there as well. He took that with him, but go on.
Yeah, I have to say, the nicest meal I've ever had was in the Lyra. So there's this thing called the Tomahawk. You know this, right? It's 1.1 kilos of beef. A steak, right? So when I ordered it off your the waitress, she goes to me, that's for 2 people, And my wife had ordered first. So she knew it was just for me. And when they came out of it, the looks I got around the place, like, oh, this yoke was massive. I think
they
it was
weren't
40,
looking at the steak, they were looking at you, Skehill. You know,
yeah, 40. I think it was. Am I right in saying it's either 40 ounces or 48 ounces?
Jesus.
How much
Yeah.
did you leave behind?
Yeah, we did get a picture. In fairness, now we will have to explain.
You probably use the picture scale if your wife allows us to use her copyrighted material here.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was me 20 minutes in.
And great restraint out of you. What do you mean? It was you 20 minutes in?
He'd already eaten half it.
I was 20 minutes into it, like.
That was half the steak. Jesus.
Like, I was 20 minutes into the middle, and I tell you one thing.
I thought that was the full thing. That's an hour.
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Or I just sit back and take a break.
So it was expected that you did actually horse into it and then said, actually take a picture of me there now. That you don't actually have the restraint to go, right, there's a lovely steak in front of me. Let's get a picture here now. 20 minutes of damage to that steak.
I didn't take the picture. My wife took it. She goes, I have to document this. This isn't even right. Took me 45 minutes to eat it.
But you did.
Cleaned it, yeah, absolutely, yeah, no problem.
And he on commission now from the Lyrat to get a free steak next time.
I didn't imagine
brand ambassador.
My loving wife, then she goes, no point being a peak unless you show it. Thanks, Chris.
And what did she pick for? Like, obviously, she had to sit for quite a bit of that meal watching you just chew down steak. What did she pick?
Yeah, so she chose the salmon, and the gas thing about it is, or sea bass, sorry. The gas thing about it is, it's the first time, hand in heart, that she's been finished before me. Like, ever eating. I'm always there twiddling my thumbs waiting for her to finish up her food. Like, you know?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so credit where credit is due.
I think she deserves to be able to watch Love Island for the next 2 weeks, given the US 45 minutes of steak in front of her.
Yeah.
And then she should put up with me day and night. That too.
Off the beaten track entirely, but Jim McCarthy was making a comment on the Kerry team, and I did think this watching Kerry and Offaly the week before. He says, watched all the Kerry games so far, can't get over how defensive and deep we play. So frustrating. Why don't we back our players and push up the field? Even when we're an extra man, we don't do this. This is something that came up and caught to me. I know you guys didn't see the game, but basically Stephen Malumphey had a setup where they played with an extra sweeper when they didn't have the wind, which was perfectly understandable because Offaly were dropping the ball down quite deep. And then in the second half, when Kerry had a gale behind them, Kerry actually sat quite defensively, and it was a really weird setup because they were running the ball quite a bit, so you could see where the tactic was coming from. But sometimes when you have the elements in your favour as much as they did, it will be very frustrating for the home crowd when they're chasing the game that they don't push a few players further forward. I think at one stage when there was literally a gale wind behind them, Kerry only had 2 or 3 players in the Offaly half and were trying to go short every time, which was inviting tackles onto them. So I do appreciate what they're trying to do, and I'd say this is a longer term plan to maybe, you know, develop a style of hurling. But sometimes I think, lads, you got to throw it out the window if you've got the opportunity to get an extra 10 or 15 yards in each ball you poke out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tough one to call, and probably in the heat of battle, maybe Kerry kind of looked at it and said, no, we're going to stick to our guns maybe, and this is what we're doing and we're trying to implement it. And when it transpires on the pitch, then that it actually turns into be quite frustrating, and particularly for the crowd, that it's not translating really on the scoreboard. You can see, and this is the dilemma teams get into sometimes as well, where, you know, you're trying to detach yourself from the crowd. You know, you're trying to implement your game. And I've seen it in Kilkenny over many years now, where Kilkenny are transitioning to a different type of game and coming with the times. And, you know, you don't just turn that on overnight. And you have games where teams are like, why are you doing the short puck out? And I've heard that so many times in Kilkenny, that Kilkenny don't play a short puck out. Well, Kilkenny don't play a short puck out. You know, you might as well just resign yourself to the fact that they're going to fall into the middle of the pack in hurling and not progress. So for Kerry, I understand with both sides, and I do agree with you, Will. Sometimes you just have to go, right, lads, we're going out here and we're just going to hurl, and that doesn't undermine our game whatsoever going forward, but this game just dictates that we should go out and go at them, lads, because we're chasing the lead here. And sometimes it's very frustrating as a team, but I also understand the other side of it, where, you know, maybe Stephen Malumphey is building this kind of game plan where, regardless, with the wind or against the wind, this is the type of play we hurl. And a win shouldn't affect how we hurl. We should just be able to play away. So I can understand the frustration for a Kerry supporter, that when you go down and you see that at the weekend, your one takeaway is that we're not playing a brand of hurling. But I'd maybe lean towards the side here of trust the process. Just trust the process. Because what I do see with teams at the moment is, actually, believe it or not, with the way the game has gone, when you're carrying the ball out of defence, you actually hurl better against the wind. Because when you have a wind in your back, it's almost like a fella pushing you in the back to take a shot. And as soon as you get to midfield, you're nearly going taking shots. And lads are blaring balls wide, and you step away from the game plan of carrying it into the shootable position. So lots of teams actually hurl really well now against the wind, which isn't traditional, because when you have the wind in your face, you look for the player out the pitch. When you strike the ball actually holds up for that player. You don't strike it over his head because there's no wind. supporting that ball to carry it away from you. So teams actually hurl quite well against the wind now because they're not looking to blow the ball 100 yards up the pitch and the wind holds it up. So I would understand the mentality of Stephen Malumphey and his management, that they're kind of going, no, this is the way we're playing. And unfortunately, it didn't translate for them at the weekend. But you can expect blowback from supporters then when you're kind of in this no man's land of implementing this game plan. You go out a day, it doesn't work out for you, the scoreboard doesn't look great, and now you don't have a whole lot of support from the stands. So it's a rock and a hard place. But what I would say to the supporters there is, look, just trust the process, because Kerry are headed in a good direction. Like they've gotten some really good results. They're playing a good brand of hurling, and on the pod we're talking about individual players from Kerry each week. So most weeks we are pointing out good performances. So I'd be inclined from experience to say, just trust the process here. But that's withstanding, Will, I do agree with you. Every so often, if it's for the sake of 35 minutes, throw off the shackles and go back to basics and see what happens.
Yeah, Kerry won the response. They go to Kildare, Newbridge on Saturday. Kildare currently top of 2A in scoring difference. So that's a huge game for both teams. And Kerry want to get a response after losing to Offaly the last day, even in dramatic circumstances. Well, if Kildare win, they'll be in a very strong position to go to the final. And Offaly play against Carlow on the back of a good result against Down. So again, if Offaly were to win, you're probably looking at Offaly versus the winners of Kildare and Kerry in the final in a few weeks' time. So they're very important games in Division 2A. Skell, I'll ask you about the Tipperary situation. Do you think Tipperary will finish in the top 3 in Munster this season? Coming in from Bob Noonan.
Ooh. We got Bob. Let's go process of elimination.
Don't make it easy anyway, Bob.
That is good. Bye, Bob.
So obviously Limerick are going to come a bit over the Hain. At present, I would probably be placing Clare at number 2.
Oh.
Yeah. Just for Munster now. We're Clare. And then it's a tough one. Cork, Tip. Jeez.
I didn't expect Cork now not to be second, but go on. Yeah, I'm not going to cut across you. Keep going.
Yeah. Will Tip be the top 3? Like, I don't get me wrong, there's positives around everything they're doing. I just think when it comes into the Munster, like, they're probably just, that group is probably a touch behind, if you know what I mean, in terms of trying to implement Cahill's game plan and, introduction of new players, etc. That just Clare and Limerick are more progressed, and as are Cork. So I'd have to answer no. They're not the top 3.
Murph?
No, I don't think so either. I do think they're doing good things at the moment. I think if anyone leaves them in a game in Munster, I think that they'll maximise what they have on the pitch, and they'll get they might get a few good results. But there is teams putting the hand up. Like at the moment, it'd be Limerick, Cork, and Clare for me, I would see is the 3. Like I do think Clare are going to come good again, and because Waterford haven't really given me anything to look at to go, actually, like this time last year we were talking about Waterford, they were playing this such aggressive brand of hurling, and it looked inevitable that these boys were going to be in the Munster final. And at the moment I just don't know where they're headed yet, so I can't say that I see them in the top 3. Tipperary, again with the injuries, trying to sustain around Robin, I don't see them week on week getting the results they need to go to being in the top 3. And I just think Clare bringing back, I even think when you see like Shane O'Donnell coming back, that's another, serious danger man up forward there for Clare. I think they've learned a lot from last year, and I think they'd be looking forward to another Munster campaign and maybe getting back to Semple Stadium to a Munster final. So that'll be my 3 in that order at the moment, to be Limerick, Cork and Clare.
Last shout then, because I could not include this, where William Coleman got in contact again, sent us a message last week. We talked about it a bit, and then he sent a follow-up voice note, which I sent to you guys a bit earlier on, and I'll insert it now into the podcast so people can hear it. This is what William Coleman had to say, just explaining in a bit more detail his plan about the championship restructure that he had in mind. So here you go.
The league currently takes, I think it's 5 group games, a semi-final and a final, which is 7 rounds. So I was proposing to replace that with a Leinster Championship and a Munster Championship at the same time in the calendar, and play it over 7 rounds max. So you could play your Munster Championship with all 6 teams in it, maybe the top team to the final and second and third playoff in the semi-final to make a Munster final. And then in Leinster you could do maybe even 2 groups of 5, depending on how many teams you want to bring into it. and have again top 2 in each group making semi-finals and playing down to a final. You could reintroduce the Ulster Championship and have the winner of that coming out to play alternative years against the Munster and Leinster champions. Those 2 spots would be preliminary quarter-finals then, instead of the Joe McDonagh winner and runner-up. So if you didn't get out here, groups of 6 later on in the main championship, that you already have qualified for preliminary quarter this way. So take Tipperary, for instance, my own county. If we didn't get into the top 3 in the 2 groups of 6, that we'd have this in our back pocket to have a preliminary quarter final and get back into the championship that way and push on. I think it just gives the competitions at the current time where the league is played a bit more of a carrot there to get through, and you might get you'll have 4 teams coming out. You could possibly have 8 teams, the winners of Munster and Leinster plus the 3 out of the 2 groups coming through, so you have real quality coming into the preliminary quarter-final stage and the quarter-finals and so on. And as I said, you could even bring back in Ulster and let them have the opportunity to play for those spots as well, and Connacht in time if they could get the counties up in standard, and they could play off against Munster and Leinster each year. So I just think given that carrot of the prize would make it work, and the 2 groups of 6 in the championship would be great. You'd have different teams playing different teams every year, not the same teams playing the same teams every year, and a bit of a buzz around it. And you see Kilkenny and Galway, Waterford in the group stages, and just something a bit different really.
So the crux of that scale really would be, that just confirms what we were wondering last week, which is that the provincial championships would go into the time space where the league is currently played over effectively 7 weeks, 2 months as things stand. Now again, whether we want to take out the breaks or look at the window around the league, that's its own matter, but the provincials would fit into that space. And then what you would have is the provincial champions in the Munster and Leinster championships would then be guaranteed a preliminary quarter-final. So that would be the incentive to win it beyond lifting the provincial cups in their own right. And then you would redraw a championship of the senior counties after that, who would play in, I'm not going to call it Champions League. You used the phrase Champions League format last week, but I think it's better to call it 2 pools effectively. And then the top 3 from then would go through to the All-Ireland Championship proper. Now there's the added incentive that William has put in there about the idea of reforming an Ulster Championship or a Connacht Championship and maybe having another couple of spots for the preliminary. I think that's him future-proofing this idea a little bit. But if we were to take the proposals, go on, Skehill.
Connacht Championship.
Yeah.
Okay, we're
well
in the future there now. So we are.
No. I don't think the Connacht Championship will happen, and even I think the Ulster Championship might be a bit of a stretch. But I think the idea would be that there is a way that those Ulster and Connacht Championships could be played early in the year, and then if they were there, you could perhaps create another spot in the last 8 for the winners of those 2 championships. But if we were to take it just as leave Ulster and Connacht to one side for the moment, because that's kind of an add-on idea, that you would have a provincial, 2 of the teams would be guaranteed, the 2 winners, a place in the last 6 in the country, and then you would have effectively 2 groups where, say, 3 teams were to come out of the 2 groups, and because that would be an open draw each season, you would end up with a championship that would have fresh fixtures, is basically the crux of it here.
So basically, you still have a league, like the league is gone effectively.
The National League would be gone.
Yeah, but it's the same kind of principle to a degree.
Yeah, championship would effectively be the National League. I think it's almost like reversing the season to a certain extent, but yeah.
Open draw, away you go.
Yeah.
So every team then is really guaranteed 5 games, is it?
Well, you'd be guaranteed at least 1 in the provincial, and you'd be guaranteed, you'd be in pools of 6 in the championship, so you'd be guaranteed 5 games.
Yeah. You see, again, like it's very hard to assess the viability of it at the moment because obviously it's an idea. But like that now, it's something that I feel can be tried. And like if it's a failure, or a failure is a strong word, but if it's not successful, we can change again or revert back to type. But like I have no issue with trying something. What I have the issue is where people don't want to try anything. Do you know what I mean? They want to leave it alone and just do the ostrich and put their head in the sand as if everything's perfect. But the idea sounds good. There's a bit of, probably there's pros and cons to it all. They haven't quite been developed out fully. But yeah, I'd be going for something like that. Like I did call for Champions League style. That sounds like Champions League style, close enough to it, if you know what I mean.
That scares GA people, by the way. When they hear Champions League style, they go, oh, we're taking in the idea from elsewhere. Even if I was to say to you, that's more like the old Champions Cup, and they'd be like, oh, rugby, not sure about this. Well, if you said to them, oh no, we're going to put in pools, and there'll be teams coming out, they go, oh yeah, that sounds a bit like what we're doing before. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I think so. You're trying to trick them a small bit. Yeah, I know what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. No, I have no issue. Like, what do you reckon? Like, I think
Go on,
innovation is
Murphy,
good.
you go first, and
I
I'll
don't
give
think if
my
you're
pros
not
and
being
cons.
innovative, if you're not progressing, you're stagnant. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, completely. See, it's tough. Like the GA traditionally will only implement very small changes and try and, they're not going to overhaul the whole thing. But to implement something like this, you would have to overhaul the whole thing in order for it to work. And like that, yeah, I'd be completely open if the plan on paper looks as if we get a more jam-packed year of really good matches, and as simple as that. It's a complex plan, but if the end result is we, from start to finish, have a more concentrated year of really good matches, I think that's the best end result you can have. Call it what you want then after that. And I do agree with you, Will. You're going to have to call it names that will, in your business plan, that doesn't reflect any other sport, because traditionally that gets shot down. So call it whatever you want to call it, but don't reference nearly other sports when you're doing it. But no, I do believe, like, my whole thing around this would be that if there is a period of the year where matches aren't being treated massively serious, well, then maybe we have room for improvement here. And then you have to look at, if the improvement comes, does it have to be a complete overhaul? If we just do 50% kind of, okay, let's take a chunk here and let's train it, the system probably doesn't work then. Like the way it's been explained there, it's a whole system overhaul. And like that, as Skehill said, if just do it, see how it works. At the end of the day, you're still going to have an All-Ireland champion, and the cream of the crop should regardless come to the top in that regard anyway. So the end result shouldn't vary at all, really, if the process is good. So I would say, yeah, if we're getting better matches, why not go for it? Why not try it over a two-year? And I think for the GA, it's usually generally a 3-year period where we'll go in this 3-year period and that's it, and see how it works after that. But, when you're explaining that, I'd say you have to say to everyone, look, in order for this to work and for us to get the product that we want, we have to do a full overhaul. We can't just pay lip service and overhaul one part of it, because that's just tinkering with the system and we're not getting the product we want at the end. So I'd be all for, like Skehill was saying there, just go for it, do it if that's what you want to do.
See, what I like about it is you got to get the provincial councils over the line if this is going to be voted in. So if you come up with a system, no matter how brilliant it might be, and you say the provincials are being taken away, provincial councils and the substantial amount of votes they have at Congress won't allow it to happen. So you have to keep the provincials. So obviously this keeps the provincials in a slightly different time zone, but it's still there. I think the only one question that will come up will be what happens with the competitions that are below senior and how they could potentially be affected. So where do they fit into the schedule, particularly if you're taking away the leagues? Do you continue, say, outside the senior counties to still have a 2A and a 2B and Division 3 and still have the lower grade competitions as a championship format? Do you keep them in the same system as now? Would some of the teams that are currently playing, say, in the second flight in the Joe McDonagh, would they be entitled to play in the Leinster Championship? Like, say, if, I don't know, Laois and Offaly are both Joe McDonagh at the moment, and say Kildare are going well, say if they haven't been promoted by right but decide that they want to take part in the Leinster Championship, would they be allowed to do so in the opening provincial championship and then drop into a second competition when they're knocked out? They'd be just the little quirks and things you'd have to work out, I think. And I think there's still plenty of merit in the graded competitions to keep them going. I still think they're really important. So I think if they can be incorporated within the system, I like the idea of the championship, whereby we know that every year we're going to get different matchups and that we get to see Galway and Cork and we get to see Waterford against Kilkenny more often than we do now. I'm not against the idea at all.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're all out of my waddy at this stage, lads, so it's probably time to call time on the pod for this week. Looking forward to the games this weekend, and looking forward to chatting to you guys next Monday as well.
Sound, lads. Talk to you.
Cheers, folks.